Hello everyone, I am MANO Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the summer of 2024, though sometimes I still can't believe it was real. "It'll be fun," my best friend Mia had insisted, her eyes bright with excitement as she spread the hiking map across my kitchen table. 3 days in Devil's Hopyard State Park, just what we both need after everything that's happened. By everything, she meant my divorce. 6 months prior, I'd found my husband of 3 years with his co-worker in our bed. The betrayal still felt like a fresh wound, and I hadn't been the same since. Mia thought reconnecting with nature might help heal my spirit. What she didn't understand was that some wounds never fully heal, and some places in nature don't want to heal you. They want to consume you. Mia Sanders was the adventurous one between us, always had been since college, with her auburn hair usually pulled into a practical ponytail and perpetually sun-kissed skin. She embodied the outdoorsy spirit I had always lacked. I was more of a homebody, preferring books and blankets to bugs and backpacks. But after months of barely leaving my apartment, even I had to admit that fresh air might do me good. "Devil's Hopyard," I muttered, tracing my finger over the contour lines of the map. "Why does it have such a creepy name?" Mia shrugged. "Local folklore, something about the devil playing fiddle by the waterfalls. Chapman Falls, they're called. Super gorgeous, and the main hiking trails are actually pretty moderate. Perfect for beginners like you." I wasn't sold, but I was tired of feeling hollow. "Fine," I agreed, "but you're in charge of all the gear." 2 days later, we pulled into the nearly empty parking lot at Devil's Hopyard State Park in East Haddam, Connecticut. It was a Tuesday morning in late June, and most people were at work or school. The sun filtered through the dense canopy of oak and maple trees, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. The air smelled of loam and pine, rich and earthly. "See?" Mia said, inhaling deeply as she stretched her arms overhead. "Already feels better than your stuffy apartment, right?" I had to admit the fresh air felt good in my lungs. For the first time in months, I felt something other than numbness or pain. It was a small spark, but it was something. We shouldered our packs, mine noticeably lighter than Mia's as she'd insisted on carrying most of the camping gear, and headed toward the trailhead. A wooden sign marked the entrance to the Vista Trail, promising panoramic views of the 8-mile river valley after a moderate climb. "We'll take this up to the ridge," Mia explained, pointing to a spot on her trail map. "Then connect to the orange trail that loops around the northern section of the park. There's a backcountry camping area about 4 miles in." The first mile was pleasant enough. The trail was well maintained, with stone steps built into the steeper sections. Chapman Falls roared in the distance, the sound growing louder as we approached. When we reached the waterfall overlook, I had to admit it was breathtaking. A 40-foot cascade tumbling over ancient rock formations, creating perfectly circular potholes in the stone below. "Those potholes are why it's called Devil's Hopyard," Mia said, reading from her guidebook. "Local legend says they were formed by the devil's hooves as he played his fiddle by the falls." "That's ridiculous," I said, peering down at the swirling water. "They're just erosion features." "Maybe," Mia replied with a mischievous smile. "But what's the fun in that explanation?" We continued our hike, the trail gradually becoming steeper and narrower. By early afternoon, we had climbed several hundred feet in elevation and were rewarded with stunning views of the Connecticut River Valley. In the distance, the river wound like a silver ribbon through the lush green landscape. "Worth it, right?" Mia asked, passing me her water bottle. I nodded, wiping sweat from my brow. I'll admit it, this was a good idea. We reached the backcountry camping area around 4 o'clock. It was a small clearing set back from the trail, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides with a stunning view of the valley on the 4th. A stone fire ring marked the center of the site. "Perfect," Mia declared, dropping her pack. "Home for the next 2 nights." We set up camp efficiently, with Mia taking the lead. Soon, our 2-person tent was pitched, sleeping bags unrolled inside, and a small fire was crackling in the ring. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, we sat on logs by the fire, cooking freeze-dried stroganoff in a small pot. "So," Mia said, poking at the flames with a stick, "how are you really doing? With the divorce and everything?" I stared into the fire, watching the embers dance. "Some days are better than others, but being out here helps. Thanks for dragging me along." "That's what best friends are for," she replied, bumping her shoulder against mine. After dinner, we cleaned up and secured our food in a bear bag hung from a tall oak tree about 100 yards from our campsite. Though black bears were uncommon in Connecticut, Mia insisted on proper wilderness protocol. "Better safe than sorry," she said as we walked back to camp in the gathering darkness. "Besides, it's not just bears you have to worry about. Raccoons and other critters can smell food from miles away." Night fell quickly in the forest. The temperature dropped and we huddled closer to the fire, sharing stories and memories from happier times. Above us, stars began to appear between the tree branches, impossibly bright away from city lights. "Did you hear that?" I asked suddenly, interrupting Mia's story about her disaster date the previous month. "Hear what?" She tilted her head, listening. "I thought I heard whistling." We both fell silent, straining to hear over the crackle of the fire. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, faintly, the sound came again, a distant, tuneless whistle that seemed to drift between the trees. "Probably just another hiker," Mia said, though she frowned. "Though I'm surprised anyone else is out here midweek." "Should we call out to them?" I asked, suddenly uneasy. Mia shook her head. "No need to invite company. If they're lost, they'll see our fire and ask for help." The whistling didn't come again, and eventually we convinced ourselves it had been the wind, or perhaps a nocturnal bird. Around 10 o'clock, we doused the fire and retreated to our tent. Exhausted from the day's hike, I fell asleep almost immediately despite the hard ground beneath my sleeping bag. I awoke disoriented, unsure what had pulled me from sleep. The tent was pitch dark, and beside me, Mia's breathing was deep and regular. My phone showed 3:17 a.m. Outside, the forest was eerily silent. No chirping insects, no rustling leaves, just complete, oppressive stillness. Then I heard it, the whistling again, closer now. A tuneless, meandering melody that raised the hair on the back of my neck. It seemed to circle our campsite, never staying in one place for long. I reached over and shook Mia's shoulder. "Wake up," I whispered urgently. "Someone's out there." Mia stirred slowly. "What?" "Listen." We both froze, holding our breath. The whistling continued for several seconds, then abruptly stopped. "Hello?" Mia called out, her voice stronger than I expected. "Is someone there?" No response, just the unnatural silence of the forest. "Maybe it's a park ranger?" I suggested, knowing even as I said it that no ranger would be patrolling remote trails at 3 in the morning. "Maybe," Mia said, but she didn't sound convinced. She reached for the flashlight we'd left by the tent door and unzipped the flap just enough to shine the beam outside. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating our campsite in harsh relief. Everything looked as we had left it. Our backpacks leaning against a nearby tree, the cold fire ring, the logs we'd sat on. Nothing seemed disturbed. "See?" Mia said, her voice betraying her relief. "Nothing there." But as she swept the flashlight in a wider arc, the beam caught something at the edge of our campsite, a glimpse of pale movement that disappeared into the trees. "What was that?" I gasped, clutching Mia's arm. "Probably a deer," she said, but her hand was trembling, causing the flashlight beam to wobble erratically. Neither of us believed it was a deer. "We should go back to sleep," Mia said finally, zipping the tent flap closed. "We have a long hike tomorrow." But sleep didn't come easily. We lay side by side in tense silence, listening to the forest. Eventually, normal night sounds resumed, the chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl. Whatever had been out there seemed to be gone. When morning finally came, I was groggy and irritable from lack of sleep. Mia looked equally exhausted, dark circles under her usually bright eyes. "Bad night," she commented as she stoked the fire back to life for breakfast. "Do you think we should head back?" I asked, glancing nervously at the surrounding forest. In daylight it seemed benign again, just trees and undergrowth with sunlight filtering through the canopy. Mia considered it, then shook her head. "Let's stick to the plan. One weird night doesn't mean anything. Probably just wildlife." I wasn't convinced, but I also wasn't eager to admit that I was spooked by what might have been nothing more than my imagination. We ate a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, then packed day packs for our planned hike along the Orange Trail loop. "We'll leave the tent and most of our gear here," Mia explained. "Just take water, lunch, and essentials for the day hike. We'll be back by late afternoon." The day hike helped restore my spirits. The Orange Trail took us through varied terrain, dense forest, open meadows bursting with wildflowers, rocky outcroppings that offered stunning views. We saw no other hikers, which Mia assured me was normal for a weekday in a less visited state park. "That's why I chose this place," she said as we paused to rest on a sun-warmed rock. "No crowds, just wilderness." By mid-afternoon, we had completed about 3/4 of the loop trail and were heading back toward our campsite. The sun was still high, but the forest had grown denser, the trees closer together, blocking much of the light. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and I found myself zipping up my light jacket. "Does this part of the trail seem different to you?" I asked Mia, who was consulting her map with a slight frown. "We should be coming up on Fox Creek soon," she said, not directly answering my question. "There's a wooden footbridge we need to cross." But after another half hour of hiking, we hadn't reached any creek or bridge. The trail seemed to be taking us deeper into the forest, not back toward our campsite, and it had definitely changed. Narrower, less maintained, with branches scraping our arms as we pushed through. "I think we missed a turn," I said, anxiety creeping into my voice. Mia stopped, studying the map more carefully. "That's not possible. The Orange Trail is a simple loop. There aren't any turnoffs we could have taken by mistake." She pulled out her phone to check the GPS, but as I'd already discovered earlier, there was no signal in this part of the forest. And oddly, my own phone's compass app seemed to be malfunctioning, the needle spinning wildly instead of pointing north. "Let's just go back the way we came," I suggested, turning around to look at the trail behind us. But that was the problem. There was no clear trail behind us anymore. Just dense forest in all directions, trees packed so tightly together that it was impossible to see more than 20 feet in any direction. "This doesn't make any sense," Mia muttered, real fear in her voice for the first time. "We've been following the blazes all day." The blazes, orange markings painted on trees to mark the trail, had indeed been consistent throughout our hike, but looking around now, I couldn't see a single one. "Let's try this way," Mia said, pointing to what seemed like a slightly clearer path through the trees. "The terrain slopes downward, so it might lead to that creek." We had no better option, so we followed the natural depression in the land, hoping it would lead us back to a marked trail. The forest grew darker as we walked, the canopy overhead so thick that it seemed like dusk was falling, though my watch showed it was only 3 in the afternoon. The whistling started again. At first, it was so faint that I thought I might be imagining it, my mind playing tricks after our unsettling night. But when Mia grabbed my arm, her fingers digging painfully into my flesh, I knew she heard it too. "Where is it coming from?" she whispered, her eyes darting between the trees. That was the disturbing part. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, surrounding us completely. The tuneless melody floated on the still air, sometimes sounding close enough that I expected to see the whistler step out from behind a nearby tree, other times seeming to come from far in the distance. "Hello?" I called out, my voice embarrassingly feeble. "Is someone there?" The whistling stopped abruptly. Then a voice, low and raspy with an accent I couldn't place, responded from somewhere to our right. "You girls lost?" We both spun toward the sound. About 30 feet away, partially obscured by a large oak tree, stood a figure. In the dim forest light I could make out the shape of a man, tall and lean, wearing what looked like a dark jacket and pants. His face was in shadow, but somehow I knew he was smiling. "We're trying to get back to the Orange Trail," Mia said, her voice admirably steady despite her obvious fear. "Can you point us in the right direction?" The man stepped forward and I had to suppress a gasp. There was something wrong with his proportions. His arms seemed too long for his body, hanging well past his hips. And his face? It was gaunt, almost skeletal, with sunken cheeks and eyes so deeply set that they appeared as black holes in his pale skin. "Name's Elias Blackwood," he said, touching the brim of a battered old hat I hadn't noticed before. "Local guide, of sorts. Orange Trail's not far, but you wouldn't want to go that way now." "Why not?" I asked, fighting the urge to back away. "Bad things happen on that trail after dark." His thin lips stretched into what might have been a smile, revealing teeth that seemed too numerous and sharp. "But I can show you another way. A shortcut." Every instinct in my body screamed danger. This man, if he was a man, wasn't right. Everything from his unnatural stillness to the way the forest seemed to dim around him set off alarm bells in my mind. "That's okay," Mia said quickly. "We have a map. We'll find our way." "Maps don't always work right in these woods," Elias said, taking another step closer. "Especially not tonight." "Why, especially not tonight?" I couldn't stop myself from asking. His grin widened. "It's the solstice. The veil's thin tonight." Before either of us could respond to this cryptic statement, a distant crack echoed through the forest, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking under weight. Elias's head snapped in that direction, his movement unnaturally quick, like footage being fast-forwarded. "They're coming," he hissed, all pretense of friendliness gone from his voice. "You need to run. Now." "Who's coming?" Mia demanded, but I was already tugging at her arm. "We need to go," I whispered urgently. Elias pointed to a barely visible path leading away from the direction of the sound. "That way. Quick, don't stop till you reach water." Despite every rational part of my brain telling me not to trust this strange man, something in his urgency seemed genuine, and the alternative, staying to find out what they were, seemed worse. "Come on," I said to Mia, pulling her toward the path Elias had indicated. As we began to run, I glanced back over my shoulder. Elias Blackwood stood exactly where we'd left him, watching us go. But now there was something else. Shapes moving between the trees behind him, dark figures that seemed to glide rather than walk, closing in from all sides. Then Elias Blackwood did something impossible. He seemed to simply come apart, his form dissolving into what looked like black smoke that quickly dispersed among the trees. I ran faster than I ever had before, dragging Mia with me down the narrow path. Behind us, an unearthly howl rose, a sound no human or animal throat could make. A chorus of voices blended into one terrible cry that spoke of hunger and pursuit. "Don't look back," I screamed at Mia, who had turned her head at the sound. We tore through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The path descended steeply, leading us into a ravine thick with undergrowth that clawed at our legs. My lungs burned, and my thighs screamed with effort, but pure terror kept me moving. The sound of rushing water reached us before we saw it, a creek wider and faster flowing than seemed possible for the relatively dry season. Without hesitation, we splashed into it, the cold water shocking against our overheated skin. "Across!" Mia gasped, pointing to the far bank. The current was stronger than it looked, the water reaching mid-thigh at its deepest point. I nearly lost my footing twice, saved only by Mia's grip on my arm. Together, we staggered to the opposite bank and pulled ourselves up onto relatively dry ground. Only then did we look back. The forest on the other side of the creek seemed unnaturally dark, as if night had fallen there while daylight still illuminated our side. And there, at the edge of the trees, stood figures, 5 or 6 of them, their forms indistinct except for their height and thinness. They made no move to cross the water but simply watched us with eyes that reflected the dying light like those of animals. "What are they?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. I shook my head, unable to speak. Whatever they weren't human. That much I knew with bone-deep certainty. We watched, paralyzed with fear, as the figures remained at the creek's edge. Then, as if responding to some signal we couldn't perceive, they began to retreat into the forest one by one, melting into the shadows until none remained. "Let's go," I said finally, my voice hoarse. "We need to find our way back to camp before dark." Mia nodded, her face pale and drawn. "The creek," she said, gesturing downstream. "Fox Creek connects to the main trail near our campsite. If we follow it downstream, we should find our way back." It was the most logical plan, so we began walking along the creek bank, careful to stay close to the water. Whether by miracle or luck, after about 20 minutes of following the creek, we spotted an orange blaze on a tree ahead. We had found the trail again. From there, it was a straightforward, if tense, hike back to our campsite. We arrived just as true dusk was falling, the sun's last rays barely penetrating the forest canopy. Our tent stood exactly as we had left it, our remaining gear untouched. "We need to leave," I said immediately. "Pack up and hike out tonight." But Mia shook her head, sinking onto a log beside the cold fire ring. "It's already getting dark. Hiking these trails at night would be suicide, especially after what we just saw. We wouldn't make it half a mile without breaking an ankle or worse." She was right, and I knew it. Whatever dangers the forest held, blindly stumbling through it in darkness wasn't the answer. "Then we need to protect ourselves somehow," I said, looking around our campsite with new eyes. It suddenly seemed terribly exposed, a tiny clearing in an endless, hostile forest. Mia reached into her pack and pulled out a small container I hadn't seen before. "My grandmother was Cherokee," she explained, opening the container to reveal what looked like dried herbs and salt. "She taught me a few things about protection. I brought this just in case." "In case of what?" I asked incredulously. "You expected to encounter whatever those things were?" She shook her head. "No, but I always bring it camping. It's a habit, one that might save our lives tonight." While I rekindled the fire, building it larger than we had the previous night, Mia walked the perimeter of our campsite, sprinkling her mixture on the ground and murmuring words in a language I didn't understand. Whether it was genuine Native American spiritual practice or something she had cobbled together from various sources, I didn't care. I was willing to try anything that might keep us safe. "What was that man?" I asked when she returned to the fire. "Elias Blackwood. Did you see what happened to him?" Mia's eyes reflected the dancing flames as she nodded slowly. "I saw. He dissolved, like he was made of smoke. He said it was the solstice," I remembered, "that the veil was thin. What do you think he meant?" "In many traditions, the summer solstice is a time when the boundary between worlds thins," Mia said, her voice academic, as if discussing something theoretical rather than something we had just experienced. "A time when spirits and other entities can more easily cross over." "You think those things were spirits?" I asked, remembering the unnatural way they had moved, how they had stopped at the water's edge. "I don't know what they were," Mia admitted, "but they clearly didn't like water. That's something. At least." We ate a cold dinner, neither of us willing to leave the fire long enough to prepare anything hot. As full darkness descended, the forest around us came alive with sounds, the normal chirps and rustles of nocturnal creatures, but also other noises that raised the hair on my arms. Occasional whispers that might have been the wind, but sounded disturbingly like voices. The crack of branches breaking, always just out of sight, and once the distant sound of whistling, that same tuneless melody we had heard the night before. "He's out there," I whispered, staring into the darkness beyond our firelight. "Watching us." "Maybe he's trying to help," Mia suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. "He did warn us about those things." I shook my head. "There's something wrong with him. You saw what happened. Normal people don't dissolve into smoke." We agreed to take watches through the night, neither of us willing to sleep unguarded. Mia took the first shift while I crawled into the tent, though I doubted I would be able to sleep. To my surprise, exhaustion overcame fear, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. When Mia shook me awake for my watch, my phone showed it was just after 2 a.m. "Anything happen?" I asked groggily, sitting up in my sleeping bag. Mia shook her head. "All quiet. The fire's still going strong and I put more wood nearby. Just keep it fed." She crawled into her sleeping bag as I exited the tent, zipping it securely behind me. The night was cool and clear, stars visible through gaps in the canopy above. I settled on a log by the fire, adding another piece of wood to the flames. For about an hour, nothing happened. The forest was quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. I was beginning to think we might make it through the night without incident when I heard it, the whistling, clearer and closer than before. I stood up, heart pounding, and turned in a slow circle trying to locate the source of the sound. The firelight created a small pool of illumination, beyond which the forest was impenetrably dark. The whistling seemed to move, circling our campsite just beyond the reach of the light. "Elias Blackwood?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is that you?" The whistling stopped. Then, from the darkness directly in front of me, Elias Blackwood stepped into the firelight. He looked different than before, more solid, more human. His proportions seemed normal now, his face less gaunt, though still unnaturally pale. But his eyes were the same, deep-set and dark, reflecting the firelight in a way that made them appear to glow from within. "You remembered my name," he said, sounding pleased. "Most don't bother." I wanted to wake Mia, but I was afraid to take my eyes off the strange man. "What do you want?" "To warn you," he said simply. "Again. They know you're here now. They've caught your scent." "Who are they?" I demanded, fear making my voice sharper than intended. Elias tilted his head, considering. "They have many names. The locals call them shadow folk. They live in the deepest parts of these woods, where sunlight never quite reaches the forest floor. Usually they keep to themselves, but on certain nights—" He trailed off, glancing up at the star-filled sky. "The solstice," I finished for him. He nodded. "They'll come for you before dawn. The water held them back today, but they've had time to gather strength. By morning, even that won't stop them." "What do they want?" My mouth was dry with fear. Elias Blackwood's thin lips curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "What all hungry things want." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "How do we stop them?" "You don't," he said flatly. "You run. Now, while there's still time." "It's the middle of the night," I protested. "We can't hike these trails in the dark." Elias reached into his jacket and pulled out what looked like an old-fashioned oil lantern, though no flame burned inside it. He set it on the ground between us. "This will guide you safely to the main road," he said. "Follow its light and don't stray from the path it reveals." I stared at the dark lantern, then back at Elias. "Why are you helping us?" Something like sadness passed across his gaunt features. "Not everyone who wanders these woods deserves what finds them." Before I could question him further, a chorus of howls erupted from the forest, the same unearthly sound we had heard earlier that day, but closer now, much closer. "Wake your friend," Elias said urgently. "You have minutes, not hours." I didn't wait to see if he would disappear in that unnatural way again. I scrambled to the tent, unzipping it with fumbling fingers. "Mia," I hissed, shaking her roughly. "Wake up! We have to go!" She was alert instantly, already reaching for her boots. "What's happening?" "They're coming," I said, throwing her jacket at her. "Those things from the forest. We have to leave now." To her credit, Mia didn't argue or ask questions. Within 2 minutes, she was out of the tent, lacing her boots with quick, efficient movements. "Grab only what you absolutely need," I instructed, shoving my phone and water bottle into my pockets. "We're leaving everything else." "Emily," Mia said, her voice strange. "Who gave you that?" She was pointing at the lantern, which now sat on the log where I'd been keeping watch. In the darkness, it had begun to emit a faint blue glow. "Elias Blackwood," I said, quickly explaining his visit and warning. "He said it would guide us to the main road." Mia looked skeptical. "And you trust him?" Another chorus of howls rose from the forest, noticeably closer than before. In the distance, trees cracked and splintered as if something large was moving through the forest with no regard for what stood in its way. "Do we have a choice?" I asked. Without waiting for her answer, I grabbed the lantern. As soon as my fingers closed around its cold metal handle, the blue light within it brightened significantly, casting a narrow beam that illuminated a path leading away from our campsite, a path I was certain hadn't been there before. "Come on," I said, already starting down the path. After a moment of hesitation, Mia followed. The lantern's light showed us just enough of the path ahead to navigate safely, though everything beyond its blue beam remained in impenetrable darkness. We moved as quickly as we dared, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind us. "Do you think they're really coming for us specifically?" Mia gasped as we half ran, half stumbled down a steep section of trail. "Or is this just something that happens in these woods?" "I don't think it matters," I replied grimly. "Either way, they're behind us, and we need to stay ahead." The path led us through parts of the forest I was certain we hadn't seen before. A grove of ancient oak trees with trunks wider than cars, a field of boulders arranged in patterns too regular to be natural, a hollow where mist clung to the ground despite the clear night sky. With every step, I became more convinced that we were traveling on no ordinary trail. After what felt like hours but was probably less than 45 minutes, the character of the forest began to change. The trees thinned, and through gaps in the canopy I could see the first faint lightening of the sky to the east. Dawn was approaching. "We're going to make it," Mia said, hope creeping into her voice for the first time. That was when the lantern's light flickered and dimmed. "No, no, no," I whispered, shaking the lantern as if that might strengthen its failing light. "Not now. Please, not now." The blue glow sputtered, then stabilized, but at a much lower intensity. The path ahead, which had been clearly illuminated before, now faded into shadow just a few feet in front of us. And the howls behind us were very close now. "Run," I said, grabbing Mia's hand. "Just run." We abandoned all caution, sprinting down the dim path as fast as we could in the pre-dawn gloom. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us, but fear drove us forward. The lantern's light failed completely, just as a gap in the trees revealed a sight that brought tears of relief to my eyes. A paved road, gleaming faintly in the growing dawn light, no more than 100 yards ahead. "There," I gasped, pointing, "the road." But between us and safety lay a final stretch of forest, and in that space, shadows were moving, detaching themselves from trees, flowing across the ground like spilled ink, converging to block our path. We skidded to a halt as the shadows rose and took form. Tall, thin figures with limbs that bent at impossible angles, their bodies seeming to absorb what little light there was rather than reflect it. Where faces should have been, they had only deeper shadows, except for eyes that glowed with the same blue light as the now dark lantern in my hand. "Mia," I whispered, backing up slowly. What do we do? The shadow figures began to advance, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait like poorly controlled marionettes. There were at least a dozen of them, spread out in a semicircle that blocked our path to the road. "The lantern," Mia said suddenly. "Emily, break the lantern." "What?" "Trust me, break it." Without understanding why, I raised the lantern high and smashed it against a nearby rock. The metal casing shattered, and from within it burst a blinding blue light. Not a flame, but something like liquid moonlight that splashed over the ground and my hands. The effect on the shadow figures was immediate and terrible. They recoiled, their forms seeming to unravel at the edges where the blue light touched them. Unearthly shrieks filled the air, sounds of pain and rage that made my ears ache. "Come on," Mia shouted, pulling me forward. We ran straight at the gap that had opened in their ranks, the blue light from the broken lantern spreading over my clothes and skin like luminescent paint. The shadow figures shrank away from us, unable or unwilling to touch the light that now clung to us. We burst through their line and sprinted the final distance to the road, not slowing until our feet hit pavement. Only then did I dare to look back. The forest edge was empty. The shadow figures had vanished, retreated to whatever dark places they called home as the first true rays of sunrise pierced the canopy. And there, at the very edge of the trees, stood Elias Blackwood, watching us. In the growing daylight, he seemed more insubstantial than ever, his edges blurring into the morning mist that clung to the forest floor. He raised a hand in what might have been farewell or warning, and then, as the sun's rays touched the spot where he stood, he simply faded away. Not the unnatural dissolution into smoke we had witnessed before, but a gentle fading, like an old photograph bleaching in the sun. "Who was he?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What was he?" I shook my head, unable to answer. The blue light from the broken lantern was fading from my skin now, dissipating in the growing daylight like morning dew. We stood on the deserted road, disheveled and exhausted, our clothes torn and dirty from our headlong flight through the forest. In the distance, I could see a road sign identifying this as Route 82, one of the main highways that ran along the border of Devil's Hopyard State Park. "We left everything," Mia said suddenly. "The tent, our packs, all our gear." "I don't care," I replied and meant it. "We're alive." It took us nearly 2 hours of walking along the highway before a puzzled park ranger spotted us and pulled over. We told him a sanitized version of our experience, that we had gotten lost on the trail and had to abandon our campsite when we felt threatened by wildlife. He seemed skeptical but offered to drive us back to our car at the main trailhead. "You girls are lucky," he commented as we drove. "These woods can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing." I caught Mia's eye, and we both suppressed hysterical laughter. If only he knew how lucky we actually were. Only when we were safely in Mia's car, driving away from Devil's Hopyard, did we begin to process what had happened. "Those things," Mia said, her hands tight on the steering wheel. "They weren't natural." "No," I agreed, "and neither was Elias Blackwood." "Do you think he was trying to help us or lead us to them?" I considered this, remembering the strange man's warnings, the lantern he had given us that ultimately saved our lives. "Help us, I think. But why?" Mia shrugged. "Maybe he was once like us, someone who encountered those things and didn't escape. Maybe he's trapped there somehow." The idea sent a chill down my spine despite the warm summer air coming through the car windows. To be trapped in those woods for eternity, with those shadow creatures lurking in the darkness. "What do you think would have happened if they had caught us?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know the answer. Mia was silent for a long moment. "I don't think we would have died," she said finally. "Not exactly." I understood what she meant. Those things hadn't just wanted to kill us. They had wanted to take something from us, to change us into something like them. Or perhaps like Elias Blackwood, neither fully alive nor fully dead, bound to the forest and its dark cycles. When we reached my apartment, Mia pulled me into a fierce hug before I got out of the car. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I never should have taken you there." "You couldn't have known," I assured her. "Besides, I think I needed it." She pulled back, looking puzzled. Needed to be chased by shadow monsters? Needed to be reminded that I'm alive, I clarified. That there are worse things than a broken marriage. That I'm stronger than I thought. It was true. The terror of the past 2 days had awakened something in me that had been dormant since my divorce. A fierce will to survive, to fight, to live. For all the horror we had experienced, I felt more alive than I had in months. That night, alone in my apartment, I took a long, hot shower, watching dirt from the forest swirl down the drain. As steam filled the bathroom, I could have sworn I heard a faint, tuneless whistle, just for a moment, then gone. I froze, my heart pounding. But there was nothing, just the sound of running water and my own ragged breathing. Later, as I was about to fall asleep, my phone chimed with a text from Mia. "Do you think we should tell someone what happened?" I thought about it for a long moment before replying. Who would believe us? 3 dots appeared as she typed her response. Good point. Better to leave it alone. I was about to set my phone aside when one more message came through. Emily. I keep thinking I hear whistling. A chill ran through me despite the warm summer night. I typed quickly, "It's just your imagination. Go to sleep." But even as I sent the message, I wasn't sure I believed it, because in the quiet of my bedroom, just at the edge of hearing, I could swear there was a faint, tuneless melody drifting on the night air. And when I closed my eyes, I could see Elias Blackwood's gaunt face and those strange, deep-set eyes that reflected the light in a way no human eyes should. The weeks that followed were normal on the surface. I returned to work, resumed my social life, even went on a date, though it didn't lead to a second. But something had changed inside me, some fundamental understanding of the world and its hidden corners. Mia and I spoke less frequently, not out of any deliberate avoidance, but because whenever we got together, the conversation inevitably turned to what we had experienced in Devil's Hopyard, and neither of us wanted to dwell on it. Too often, one of us would think we heard whistling, and our evening would end shortly thereafter. 2 months after our camping trip, Mia called me late one night. "Have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "No. What's going on?" 3 hikers have gone missing in Devil's Hopyard. They were due back 3 days ago. Search and rescue teams haven't found any trace of them. My blood ran cold. When did they go missing? "Last weekend," Mia replied, "during the fall equinox." The equinox, another time when, according to folklore, the veil between worlds thins, just like the solstice. "Do you think—" I began. "Yes," Mia cut me off. "I think they encountered what we did, and I think they weren't as lucky." We were silent for a long moment, both contemplating the fate of 3 strangers who had ventured into those woods without knowing what lurked in the shadows. "We should tell someone," Mia said finally. "Warn people about what's in there." "And say what?" I asked. "That the forest is haunted by shadow monsters that come out during solstices and equinoxes. That there's a ghost named Elias Blackwood who might help you if you're lucky? They'd think we were crazy." Mia sighed. "You're right, but it feels wrong to stay silent." "I know," I agreed. "But what choice do we have?" After we hung up, I sat in my darkened apartment, staring out the window at the night sky. Somewhere out there, in the depths of Devil's Hopyard State Park, 3 hikers might be experiencing their own encounter with the shadow folk. Or worse, they might already have joined their ranks, or become something like Elias Blackwood, trapped between worlds. I thought about the lantern and its strange blue light, the light that had saved us when nothing else would have. Had Elias given similar help to others before us? How many had he failed to save? And how had he come to be what he was? Questions without answers, mysteries that would likely remain unsolved. But one thing I knew with certainty, I would never set foot in those woods again, especially not when the veil was thin. A week later, the search for the missing hikers was called off. No bodies were recovered, no explanation found for their disappearance. The official statement cited the rugged terrain and the possibility that they had veered off trail and become disoriented. Mia and I knew better. That night I dreamed of Devil's Hopyard for the first time since our escape. In the dream, I walked a moonlit path through the forest, following the sound of whistling. I knew I should be afraid, but in the dream, I felt only a strange sense of peace. The path led to Chapman Falls, where a figure sat on a rock beside the cascading water. Elias Blackwood turned to me, his gaunt face sad in the moonlight. "They're coming more often now," he said, though his lips didn't move. "The shadow folk. The veil grows thinner each year." "Why?" I asked. "The world changes. Old boundaries weaken. What was once confined breaks free." In the dream, I sat beside him on the rock, watching the water tumble down into the perfectly circular potholes below. "Is that what happened to you? You were caught when the veil was thin?" Elias nodded slowly. "Long ago, before the park had a name, before there were trails and campsites." "And the others, the hikers who just went missing?" A look of infinite sadness crossed his face. "I tried to help them, as I tried to help those before them, as I tried to help you." "But we escaped," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "You did. Why me and Mia? Why not the others?" Elias turned to look at me directly, his deep-set eyes now glowing with that strange blue light. "Perhaps because you were already acquainted with darkness. You had faced your own shadows before you met those in the forest." I woke with tears on my face, though I couldn't say why. The dream lingered, feeling more like a visitation than a product of my sleeping mind. Later that day, on a whim, I researched the history of Devil's Hopyard State Park. Among the dry facts about its establishment as a state park in the 1930s, I found a single reference to an Elias Blackwood, a local guide who had disappeared in the area in 1891. His body never recovered. Just a coincidence, I told myself. A name my subconscious had plucked from somewhere and assigned to the strange figure who had helped us in the forest. But that night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again, that faint, tuneless whistling, and somehow I knew it wasn't a warning this time, but a farewell. In the years since, I've never returned to Devil's Hopyard. I've warned others away from it as well, especially around the solstices and equinoxes, though I never tell them exactly why. Who would believe such a story? Mia moved to California last year, putting as much distance as possible between herself and those Connecticut woods. We still talk occasionally, but never about what happened that June night. Some experiences are too profound, or too terrifying, to revisit even in conversation. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night and the moon is full, I still think I hear whistling, just at the edge of perception, a tuneless melody that raises the hair on my arms. In those moments, I wonder about Elias Blackwood and what he truly was. A ghost, a guardian, something the forest had transformed over long years of isolation, and I wonder about those shadow folk, what they wanted from us, why they hunted us, what they might have made us become had they caught us. But mostly, I wonder how many other places like Devil's Hopyard exist in the world. Places where the veil between worlds grows thin at certain times, where things that should not exist walk freely, and where unwary travelers might find themselves caught in ancient cycles they never knew existed. I don't go camping anymore. I found other ways to heal from my divorce, other paths to rediscover myself that don't involve venturing into dark woods where things whistle in the night. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still walk that moonlit path to Chapman Falls. And Elias Blackwood is always there, waiting to tell me secrets about the shadow folk and the thinning veil. In those dreams, I'm never afraid. It's only when I wake that the fear returns, along with the certainty that someday when I least expect it, I'll hear that tuneless whistling again, And this time, it might not be just a memory or a dream, because some things, once encountered, never truly leave you. They linger at the edges of your perception, waiting for a moment of weakness or a thinning of your own personal veil, waiting to pull you back into the shadows. My name is Angela Roberts and I am 32 years old. This happened in Connecticut's Pachog State Forest last summer. What was meant to be a weekend of reconnecting with nature turned into something I still struggled to comprehend. I'd never considered myself the outdoorsy type. Give me a good book and a warm bath over muddy trails any day. But when my best friend Heather Campbell suggested we escape the city for a weekend camping trip, something in me craved the change. We'd been friends since college, the kind who could go months without talking and pick up exactly where we left off. Lately, though, the gaps between our conversations had grown longer, our lives diverging in subtle ways I couldn't quite articulate. "There's this amazing spot in Pachog," Heather said over coffee one Tuesday morning. "My brother went there last year. It's called Devil's Den Preserve. Supposedly got its name because locals thought the unusual rock formations were made by the devil himself." I raised an eyebrow. "You're really selling this trip, Heather?" She laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's just a name. Besides, don't you think we need this? When's the last time you did something spontaneous?" She had me there. Between my job as a graphic designer and my recent breakup with Daniel, spontaneity had fallen by the wayside. I needed this. Needed to remember who Angela Roberts was outside the constraints of deadlines and disappointment. "Fine," I conceded. "But if I get eaten by a bear, I'm haunting you." "Deal," she said, clinking her mug against mine. That's how, 3 days later, I found myself loading my sensible sedan with camping supplies I'd hastily purchased from REI. Heather had texted me a list of essentials, but standing in the aisles of outdoor equipment, I'd felt overwhelmingly out of my element. The salesperson had taken pity on me, guiding me toward a sleeping bag rated for the mild Connecticut summer nights and a backpack that wouldn't strain my shoulders. I picked up Heather from her apartment in Hartford at 7 a.m. sharp. She bounded down the steps of her building with an enthusiasm that both annoyed and impressed me at that hour. Unlike my haphazard collection of new gear, everything she carried looked well-worn and practical. "Ready for adventure?" she asked, throwing her pack into my trunk. "As I'll ever be," I replied, handing her a thermos of coffee I'd prepared as a peace offering for my morning grumpiness. The drive to Pachog took just under 2 hours. We filled it with the kind of comfortable conversation that only exists between old friends, updates on mutual acquaintances, complaints about work, and debates about which podcast was most overrated. As the suburbs gave way to increasingly dense woodlands, I felt the knot of tension between my shoulder blades begin to loosen. "So, what's the plan exactly?" I asked as we turned onto a narrow road that cut through the forest. "Because my wilderness survival skills begin and end with knowing you shouldn't eat the colorful berries." Heather pulled out her phone, frowning slightly at the dwindling signal bars. "There's a trail that leads to a secluded camping area about 3 miles in. My brother said it's absolutely gorgeous. This small clearing surrounded by these massive rock formations. Most people don't know about it because it's not on the official park maps." Something in her tone made me glance over. "That sounds off the beaten path." "That's the point. No obnoxious families or drunk college kids, just us and nature." She slipped her phone back into her pocket. "Don't worry, I downloaded the trail map before we left civilization." We reached the parking area around 9:30 a.m. Only 2 other cars occupied the gravel lot, both covered in a fine layer of dust that suggested they'd been there for some time. As I stepped out of the car, the smell hit me immediately. Rich earth, pine, and something else I couldn't identify. Something almost metallic. "Smell that fresh air?" Heather inhaled deeply, stretching her arms toward the canopy of trees above us. I mimicked her gesture, feeling slightly self-conscious but also inexplicably giddy. The forest stretched in every direction, ancient and indifferent to our presence. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns, creating shifting mosaics on the forest floor. For a moment, I understood the appeal. We shouldered our packs, mine already digging uncomfortably into my shoulders despite the salesperson's assurances, and headed toward a wooden signpost marking the trailhead. A weathered map displayed the official trails, color-coded and neatly labeled. "So, which way to this secret spot of yours?" I asked, scanning the map for anything resembling Devil's Den. Heather pulled out her phone again, checking something before pointing to a faint trail branching off the main blue-blazed path. "We follow the main trail for about a mile, then take this smaller path here. It's not marked well, but my brother said to look for a lightning-struck pine at the junction." I tried to quell the flutter of unease in my stomach. "And your brother did this hike alone?" "No, he was with friends." She must have noticed my expression because she added, "Angela, it's going to be fine. People hike here all the time. It's Connecticut, not the Amazon rainforest." I nodded, adjusting my pack. "Lead the way, Bear Grylls." The first mile was pleasant enough. The trail was wide and well-maintained, with occasional wooden bridges spanning small streams. We passed a middle-aged couple heading in the opposite direction who nodded politely as we passed. Their presence reassured me. We weren't alone out here. Heather walked slightly ahead, her stride confident and practiced. I found myself studying her, noticing subtle changes since we'd last spent significant time together. Her hair was shorter, her shoulders more defined. Had she always been this outdoorsy? I tried to remember if she'd shown interest in hiking during our college years, but came up blank. "How much farther to the turnoff?" I called, already feeling the beginnings of a blister on my heel. "Should be coming up soon," she replied without turning around. "Keep an eye out for that lightning-struck tree." We walked in silence for another 15 minutes before Heather stopped abruptly. Off to our right, a massive pine tree stood like a sentinel, its top splintered and blackened where lightning had cleaved it nearly in half. Despite the damage, the tree lived on, its lower branches green and vibrant against the charred upper trunk. "There it is," Heather said, a note of triumph in her voice. "The trail should be just beyond it." Sure enough, a narrow path barely wide enough for one person snaked away from the main trail, disappearing into denser forest. Unlike the main path, this one seemed to have been made by use rather than design, with no trail markers or signs indicating where it led. "Are you sure this is it?" I asked, peering down the shadowy path. "Positive. Jake's directions were very specific." Heather was already moving toward it, her earlier enthusiasm undiminished. I hesitated, looking back at the main trail with its reassuring blue blazes. The couple we'd passed earlier was long gone, and we hadn't seen any other hikers since. The forest suddenly seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. "Angela, you coming?" Heather stood at the mouth of the narrow trail, head tilted in question. I took a deep breath. "Yeah, right behind you." The difference between the trails was immediate and stark. Where the main path had been open and sun-dappled, this one tunneled through dense undergrowth that occasionally brushed against my arms as I passed. The canopy above grew thicker, filtering the sunlight to a greenish gloom. The path itself was uneven, forcing me to watch my footing carefully. "How did your brother even find this place?" I called ahead to Heather, who was moving with irritating ease despite the challenging terrain. "One of his friends grew up around here. Local knowledge, you know." Her voice drifted back to me. "Supposedly, there's all kinds of legends about Devil's Den, Native American spirits, colonial witches, the works." "Wonderful," I muttered, swatting at a mosquito that had found the exposed skin of my neck. We hiked for what felt like hours but was probably closer to 45 minutes. The path occasionally widened only to narrow again, winding deeper into the forest. I was about to suggest we take a break when Heather stopped ahead of me, her posture suddenly alert. "Did you hear that?" she asked, voice lowered. I froze, straining my ears. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing and the ambient sounds of the forest. Leaves rustling, distant birds. Then, faintly, something else. A sound like distant singing, or perhaps weeping, carried on the breeze. "Probably just other hikers," I said, not believing it myself. The sound had an eerie, disembodied quality that raised the hair on my arms. "Maybe," Heather agreed, though she didn't sound convinced. "It's coming from up ahead. That's a good sign we're on the right track." Before I could argue that following strange sounds in the forest was actually the opposite of a good idea, she was moving again. Her pace quickened. I hurried after her, not wanting to be left behind. The path began to slope gently upward, the terrain becoming rockier. Large boulders appeared among the trees, some covered in thick moss, others bare and striated with minerals that caught what little light penetrated the canopy. The singing, or weeping, I still couldn't decide which, grew louder, though no clearer. Then, suddenly, the trees thinned and we emerged into a clearing ringed by towering rock formations. The stones were massive and oddly shaped, creating what looked almost like a natural amphitheater. At the center of the clearing was a fire pit ringed with smaller stones, blackened from previous use. "We made it!" Heather exclaimed, dropping her pack beside the fire pit. "Isn't this amazing?" I had to admit it was. The rock formations were unlike anything I'd seen before, rising 30 or 40 feet into the air in impossible configurations, balanced precariously on one another as if placed by giant hands. The clearing itself was roughly circular, perhaps 50 feet across, with flat ground perfect for setting up tents. But something felt off. The singing had stopped the moment we entered the clearing, cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that replaced it felt somehow heavy, expectant. And despite the impressive setting, there was something about the rock formations that unsettled me. Angles that seemed just slightly wrong, surfaces that appeared to shift when viewed from the corner of my eye. "Your brother camped here?" I asked, setting my pack down beside Heather's. "Yep. He said it was the best camping spot in all of Connecticut." She was already unpacking her tent, seemingly oblivious to the strange atmosphere I was feeling. I glanced around the clearing again. I don't see any evidence of other campers. It was true. The fire pit, while clearly used before, showed no recent signs of activity. No trash, no trampled grass beyond our own footprints, no tree limbs stripped for firewood. If others came here regularly, they were unnaturally tidy. Heather paused in her unpacking. Maybe the rangers clean it up. Anyway, help me set up the tents before it gets too late." We worked together to pitch our tents on opposite sides of the fire pit. Mine was a simple one-person dome that the REI salesperson had assured me even a camping novice could set up. They were mostly right, though Heather had to help with a few of the more stubborn poles. By the time both tents were up, the sun had shifted position, though it was hard to tell exactly what time it was through the dense canopy. "I'm going to gather some firewood," Heather said, dusting off her hands. "Why don't you set up the cooking stuff?" I nodded, grateful for the simpler task. As I arranged our small camp stove and unpacked the freeze-dried meals we'd brought, I kept finding my gaze drawn to the rock formation surrounding us. From this angle, with the sun beginning its western descent, shadows gathered in the crevices between the boulders. I could almost imagine faces in those shadows, watching with hollow eyes. "Stop it," I scolded myself. "This is why you don't usually go camping. Too much imagination." Heather returned with an armful of small branches and twigs, dumping them beside the fire pit. "Not the greatest selection, but it should do for tonight," she said. "We can look for more in the morning." As she arranged the wood in the pit, I noticed her glancing repeatedly at her phone. "Something wrong?" I asked. "No service," she replied, frowning. "Jake said there might be patches where you could get a bar or two on the ridge, but I'm showing nothing." "Does anyone know we're out here?" The question came out more anxious than I'd intended. Heather looked up, her expression softening. "My roommate knows where we went, and we signed the trail register at the parking lot. Don't worry so much, city girl." I forced a smile. "Sorry, new experiences make me nervous. I'm fine." We finished setting up camp and Heather got the fire started as dusk began to settle over the clearing. The temperature dropped noticeably as the sun disappeared, and I was grateful for the warmth of the flames. We heated our freeze-dried meals, some sort of pasta with chicken for me, chili for Heather, and ate in companionable silence. "So," Heather said finally, scraping the last of her meal from its pouch, "what do you think of camping so far?" I considered the question. Despite my unease about our surroundings, there was something undeniably peaceful about sitting by a fire as darkness gathered around us. The stars were beginning to appear overhead, more than I'd ever seen in the city. "It's growing on me," I admitted, "though ask me again after I try to sleep on the ground." Heather laughed. "That's the spirit. And hey, thanks for coming. I know this isn't really your thing." "What made you want to do this anyway?" I asked. "You never struck me as the rugged outdoors woman before." Something flickered across her face. Hesitation, perhaps. "I've been trying new things lately. After the divorce, I needed to remind myself who I am when I'm not trying to please someone else." I nodded, understanding completely. Heather's divorce from Eric had been finalized 8 months ago, ending a 5-year marriage that had seemed perfect from the outside. She rarely talked about it, and I'd respected her need for privacy. "Makes sense," I said. "For what it's worth, I think outdoorsy Heather's pretty cool." She smiled, poking at the fire with a stick. "Thanks. How about you? How's life post-Daniel?" I shrugged. Quieter, less dramatic, better, mostly. We fell into reminiscing about our disastrous romantic histories, the conversation flowing easily as the fire crackled between us. For a while, I forgot my unease about the clearing and the strange singing we'd heard on the trail. This was why we'd come, to reconnect, to remember the friendship that had sustained us through college and beyond. As the fire burned down to embers, Heather yawned widely. "I think I'm going to turn in. The hike wiped me out more than I expected." "Me too," I agreed, suddenly aware of the ache in my legs and shoulders. We doused the fire carefully, making sure no embers remained active. The darkness that fell over the clearing was nearly complete, broken only by our headlamps and the faint starlight filtering through the trees. We said our good nights and retreated to our respective tents. Inside my little dome, I changed into sleep clothes and wriggled into my sleeping bag. The ground beneath was hard despite the thin sleeping pad I'd laid down. I shifted, trying to find a comfortable position, listening to the nocturnal sounds of the forest through the thin fabric of the tent. Insects chirping, occasional rustles in the underbrush, the soft hooting of an owl. Normal sounds, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. Eventually, exhaustion overcame discomfort, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep. I woke abruptly, disoriented in the absolute darkness. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or why I was sleeping on the ground. Then it came back to me. The camping trip, Devil's Den, Heather in the tent across the clearing. What had woken me? I lay perfectly still, straining my ears. The night had fallen silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, not even the distant hoot of an owl. The silence was absolute and profoundly wrong. Then I heard it. The singing again, or perhaps weeping, just as we'd heard on the trail. But closer now, almost as if it were coming from the clearing itself. A high, wavering sound that might have been beautiful if not for the desperation woven through it. I fumbled for my phone, checking the time. 3:17 a.m. The witching hour, my grandmother would have called it. I pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the rational explanation. An animal, perhaps, or the wind through the rock formations creating unusual acoustics. But the air was still, and no animal I knew made sounds like that. So eerily human, yet not quite right, like a record played at the wrong speed. I should wake Heather, I thought. But what would I say? That I was scared of the dark like a child? That I'd heard a spooky noise? She would never let me live it down. Instead, I reached for my headlamp, needing its reassuring beam to push back the darkness. I clicked the button. Nothing happened. I clicked it again, then checked the batteries. They were new, installed just before the trip. There was no reason it shouldn't work. A seed of panic bloomed in my chest as I reached for my phone again, activating its flashlight function. The weak beam illuminated the interior of my tent, the familiar shapes of my backpack and water bottle doing little to calm my racing heart. I debated what to do. Wake Heather? Venture outside to investigate the sound? Or stay where I was, trying to ignore it until morning came? The decision was made for me when the singing abruptly stopped, replaced by what sounded like footsteps circling my tent. Slow, deliberate steps that seemed to pause occasionally as if whatever was out there was listening for me. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to call out to Heather, but fear had frozen my voice. The footsteps continued their circuit, drawing closer to the door of my tent. A shadow fell across the fabric, a darker silhouette against the already dark night. Something was standing just outside, separated from me by only a thin layer of nylon. "Heather?" I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. The shadow remained motionless. "Heather, if that's you, it isn't funny." The shadow shifted slightly, growing larger as if leaning closer. Then a voice, not Heather's, not entirely human, whispered back, "Angela." Just my name, but spoken in a way that sent ice through my veins. The voice was raspy, as if unused for a long time, and carried an accent I couldn't place, something ancient and strange. "Who's there?" I demanded, trying to sound braver than I felt. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear breathing now, slow and wet, like someone with fluid in their lungs. "Join us," the voice whispered. "In the stones. Join us, Angela." Something brushed against the tent fabric, what felt like fingers tracing a path down the side. I recoiled, pressing myself against the opposite wall of the tent. "Leave me alone!" I shouted, hoping to wake Heather if nothing else. The fingers stopped their movement. For a moment, everything was still again. Then, without warning, my tent collapsed inward as if struck by tremendous force. The poles snapped, fabric enveloping me like a shroud as I screamed, thrashing against the sudden confinement. I could hear Heather now, calling my name from across the clearing. I fought my way out of the tangled tent, gasping as cool night air hit my face. Scrambling to my feet, I aimed my phone's light around the clearing, searching for whatever had spoken and destroyed my tent. The beam caught nothing but trees and rocks. Heather was emerging from her tent, headlamp blazing, expression alarmed. "Angela! What happened?" she asked, rushing to my side. Someone was outside my tent," I panted. "They knew my name, Heather. They said, 'Join us in the stones,' and then my tent just collapsed." Heather swept her headlamp around the clearing, its beam stronger than my phone's light. "I don't see anyone. Are you sure you weren't dreaming?" "My tent is destroyed." I pointed at the flattened dome. "That wasn't a dream." She frowned, approaching the collapsed shelter cautiously. After examining it for a moment, she looked back at me. The main support pole snapped. It could have been defective. And the voice? The fingers on my tent? Was that defective too? My voice rose with each question, bordering on hysteria. Heather put a hand on my shoulder. "Calm down. It was probably the wind, or an animal investigating the tent. Your mind filled in the rest." I shook my head vehemently. "I know what I heard. Something is out here with us, Heather. We need to leave. In the middle of the night? That's way more dangerous than staying put until morning." She was right, of course. Trying to navigate the unmarked trail in darkness would be foolish at best, deadly at worst. But the thought of spending another minute in the clearing made my skin crawl. "Then let me stay in your tent," I pleaded. "I'm not sleeping alone after this." Heather hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Of course, let's get your sleeping bag and essentials." We salvaged what we could from my collapsed tent, then retreated to Heather's. Her one-person tent was cramped with both of us inside, but I didn't care. I felt safer with her solid presence beside me, though sleep seemed impossible now. "What did you mean about join us in the stones?" Heather asked after we'd settled in, her voice quiet in the darkness. I shuddered at the memory. That's what the voice said. Join us in the stones. Angela. I don't know what it meant. Heather was silent for a long moment. There are stories about Devil's Den, old stories about disappearances, people who went into the forest and never came out. You're just telling me this now, I hissed, fear giving way momentarily to anger. I thought they were just local legends, the kind of stories every small town has. She sounded defensive. My brother camped here without any problems. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Sorry, I'm just freaked out. Let's just try to get some sleep. We'll head back first thing in the morning. Heather agreed, and we lapsed into silence. Despite my certainty that I wouldn't sleep again, exhaustion eventually pulled me under. Heather's steady breathing beside me a talisman against the darkness. The sound of rain on the tent fly woke me. Daylight filtered through the nylon, gray and diffuse, the sun obscured by storm clouds. Heather was already awake, sitting up in her sleeping bag, a troubled expression on her face. "Morning," I mumbled, rubbing sleep from my eyes. "What time is it?" "Just after 7, she replied. "But we've got a problem. I can't find my phone." I sat up, fully awake now. "What do you mean, you can't find it? It was right here last night." "I know. I put it in the tent pocket before going to sleep, but it's gone now." She gestured to the empty mesh pocket sewn into the tent wall. "Could it have fallen out?" I suggested, though the knot of dread in my stomach was already tightening. We searched the tent thoroughly, then checked our backpacks in the area immediately around the tent, getting soaked in the process. The phone was nowhere to be found. "This doesn't make sense," Heather said, pushing wet hair from her face. "It couldn't have just walked away." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true, not after what had happened during the night. "Check your map," I said. "The downloaded one you mentioned yesterday." Heather's expression fell. "It was on my phone." The implications hit us both simultaneously. Without her phone, we had no map of the unmarked trail that had led us to the clearing. The main trail was a straight shot from the parking lot, but finding our way back to it would be challenging. "We'll figure it out," Heather said, with more confidence than I felt. "The trail we came in on was pretty distinctive. And we've got your phone, right?" I nodded, pulling it from my pocket. The battery was at 42%. Not great, but enough if we used it sparingly. No service, of course. "Let's pack up and get moving," I said. "I don't want to spend another night here." We dismantled Heather's tent and packed our gear as quickly as possible. The rain had diminished to a light drizzle, but the forest around us was transformed. Colors muted, visibility reduced, familiar landmarks altered by the weather. I kept glancing at the rock formations as we worked, half expecting to see something watching us from the shadows between the stones. "Ready?" Heather asked when our packs were shouldered. I nodded, unable to shake the feeling that we were being observed. As we approached the spot where the trail had led us into the clearing, I noticed something odd. Where yesterday there had been a clear path, today there seemed to be 3 separate trails leading into the forest, each equally well-defined. "That's not right," Heather said slowly, coming to stand beside me. "There was only one trail yesterday." "Could we have approached from a different angle?" I suggested, though I knew it wasn't true. The fire pit had been the center of the clearing, our tents on either side. We were standing exactly where we had entered. Heather shook her head. "Something's wrong. Really wrong." For the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes, and it frightened me more than anything that had happened so far. Heather was my anchor, the experienced one. If she was scared... "Let's try this one," I said, pointing to the middle path. "It looks most like the one we came in on." Heather nodded, and we set off, the dense undergrowth closing around us almost immediately. The rain continued to fall, dripping from leaves and soaking through my supposedly waterproof jacket. The path was narrow and winding, just like the one from yesterday. But something about it felt unfamiliar. We walked for nearly an hour, the forest growing darker and more tangled around us. There was no sign of the lightning-struck pine that marked the junction with the main trail, and the terrain seemed to be leading us uphill rather than down toward the parking area. "This isn't right," Heather finally admitted, stopping to catch her breath. "We should have hit the main trail by now." I pulled out my phone, hoping against hope that we might have stumbled into an area with service. Still nothing. The battery had dropped to 36%. "We should go back to the clearing," I suggested reluctantly. "Try one of the other paths." Heather nodded, looking defeated. We turned around, retracing our steps through the rain-soaked forest. But as we walked, I began to notice subtle differences in the path. Trees I didn't remember passing, a fallen log that hadn't been there before, a sharp bend where I recalled a straight stretch. "Heather," I said, my voice tight with panic, "I don't think this is the same path we came down." She stopped, looking around with growing alarm. "That's not possible. We've been walking in a straight line back the way we came." But we both knew something impossible was happening. The forest seemed to be shifting around us, rearranging itself like a living maze. "We need to keep moving," Heather decided. "If we stay on this path, we have to come out somewhere." We pushed on, the rain intensifying again, turning the path into mud that sucked at our boots. The trees pressed closer, branches scraping against our packs, undergrowth catching at our legs. And all the while, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, guided deeper into the forest by some unseen force. After another hour of increasingly difficult hiking, the path suddenly widened, opening into a small clearing. For a moment, I thought we'd somehow circled back to Devil's Den, but this was a different place, smaller, with a single massive boulder at its center rather than the ring of rock formations. The boulder was perhaps 15 feet tall and oddly shaped, with what looked like symbols or pictographs carved into its surface. They were weathered with age, almost indistinguishable from natural erosion patterns unless you knew to look for them. "What is this place?" I whispered, not wanting to disturb the heavy silence that hung over the clearing. Heather shook her head, approaching the boulder cautiously. "I don't know. It's not on any of the maps I studied." She reached out, her fingers hovering over one of the carved symbols, something that looked vaguely like a human figure with too many limbs. "Don't touch it," I said sharply. Heather's hand froze, then dropped back to her side. "Sorry, there's something familiar about these markings." A cold feeling spread through my chest. "What do you mean? Familiar?" She frowned, her eyes tracing the patterns on the stone. "I don't know. Like I've seen them before, but I can't remember where." A gust of wind swept through the clearing, carrying with it that same haunting sound we'd heard before, part song, part lamentation. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the small space before fading into the distance. "We need to leave," I said, grabbing Heather's arm. "Now." She didn't resist as I pulled her away from the boulder, her expression dazed, almost trance-like. We hurried back to the path we'd come from, only to find it gone, smooth, unbroken forest floor where the trail had been minutes before. "This isn't happening," I muttered, spinning around to check the other sides of the clearing. "This can't be happening." But there were no paths leading from the clearing now, not in any direction. Just uninterrupted forest, dense and impenetrable. "They want us to stay," Heather said, her voice oddly flat. "They've been waiting so long." I turned to her, alarm bells ringing in my head. "Heather, what are you talking about?" Her eyes were unfocused, gazing past me at the boulder. "The stone people. They're lonely. Snap out of it." I shook her shoulders, panic rising in my throat. "There are no stone people. We need to find a way out of here." She blinked several times, her eyes gradually clearing. "Angela? What? What happened?" "You were talking nonsense about stone people," I said, not releasing her shoulders. "Are you okay?" She rubbed her temples, wincing. "I don't know. I feel strange, like there's something in my head, whispering. The singing rose again, louder this time, resolving into words I almost understood. Ancient syllables that seemed to bypass my ears and speak directly to some primitive part of my brain. Heather stiffened, her eyes going wide. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "They're calling us." "Don't listen," I pleaded, taking her hand. "We have to stay together, Heather. We have to find a way out." I pulled my phone out again, 31% battery now, and opened the compass app. If we couldn't find a trail, we could at least try to maintain a consistent direction. "The parking lot is northeast of Devil's Den," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If we head southwest, we should hit the main trail eventually." Heather nodded absently, her gaze still drawn to the boulder. With growing unease, I noticed that the carved symbols seemed more distinct now, as if they were slowly raising from the stone surface. I tugged Heather's hand. "Come on, we're going this way." We pushed into the forest, forcing our way through underbrush and around tree trunks. Without a path to follow, our progress was painfully slow, branches clawing at our faces and clothes, unseen roots threatening to trip us with every step. The rain had stopped, but water still dripped from the canopy above, a constant reminder of our misery. Despite my attempt to maintain a straight line, the forest seemed to resist our passage, growing denser in the direction we tried to move, forcing us to take detours and double back. The compass on my phone spun erratically, the needle rotating at random as if we were standing at the magnetic North Pole. After what felt like hours, we stumbled into another clearing, and my heart sank. The same boulder stood at the center, its carved symbols now unmistakably clear, almost glowing with an inner light. "We're going in circles," I said, despair threatening to overwhelm me. "No," Heather replied, her voice distant again. "It's following us, or leading us. I can't tell anymore." I turned to her, alarmed by her tone. Her face was pale, eyes glassy. "Heather, stay with me. Don't listen to whatever's in your head." She smiled faintly. "It's too late for that, Angie. They've been talking to me since we got here. Since before we got here." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "What do you mean, before we got here?" Heather's gaze drifted back to the boulder, an unsettling smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I had the dreams for weeks. The singing, the stones, this place calling to me. I thought it was just stress from the divorce, but the dreams got more specific. They showed me how to find Devil's Den, told me to bring someone they wanted." My throat constricted as realization dawned. "You never talked to your brother about this place, did you?" She shook her head slowly. "Jake's never been here. No one has, not for a long time, not since the last offering." I backed away from her, my legs trembling. "Offering? Heather, what the hell is going on?" "I didn't want to believe it either," she said, taking a step toward me. "But they promised me things, Angela. Relief from the pain, from the emptiness. All I had to do was bring you here." "Me?" My voice cracked. "Why me?" "They chose you. I don't know why." Her expression shifted, a flicker of the old Heather breaking through. "I'm sorry. I thought it was just dreams, just my imagination. I never believed it was real until we got here and I heard them for myself." The singing rose around us again, no longer bothering to disguise itself as wind or distant hikers. It filled the clearing, a chorus of inhuman voices that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound bypassed them, resonating directly in my skull. "Make it stop," I shouted, dropping to my knees. "I can't," Heather replied, her own hands now pressed against her temples. "They're coming. They're coming through." The symbols on the boulder were moving now, flowing like liquid across the stone's surface. They rearranged themselves, forming new patterns that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. The rock itself seemed to be breathing, expanding and contracting in time with the singing. Then, with a sound like ice cracking, a fissure appeared in the boulder's center. It widened slowly, revealing not the stone's interior, but a darkness deeper than night. A cold wind rushed from the opening, carrying the scent of earth and decay and something else, something ancient and wrong. From that darkness, something began to emerge. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. My mind refused to assemble the pieces into a coherent whole, instead registering impressions. Limbs too numerous and jointed in impossible ways. Skin like weathered stone veined with luminescent minerals. A face, or perhaps faces, with features that shifted and flowed like the symbols on the boulder. "Heather, run!" I screamed, scrambling to my feet. But Heather wasn't listening anymore. She stood transfixed, arms outstretched toward the emerging horror, welcoming it. The thing reached for her with appendages that seemed to elongate as they moved, wrapping around her almost tenderly. I should have run. Everything in me screamed to flee, to crash through the underbrush without looking back. But I couldn't leave Heather, not even as she surrendered herself to this nightmare. "Let her go," I demanded, my voice thin with terror. The creature paused, its attention shifting to me. I felt the weight of its regard like a physical pressure, pushing me back a step. The singing changed pitch, becoming questioning. "She is not the one," a voice said, not Heather's, but using her mouth to form the words. Her head turned toward me, but her eyes had changed, pupils expanding until no white remained, just bottomless black pools. "You are the one, the vessel." "I'm not anything to you," I said, backing away further. "Let Heather go, and we'll leave. We'll never come back to this place." A sound emanated from Heather's mouth that might have been laughter. "This place is everywhere. The stones remember. The stones wait. And now they have found you." The thing holding Heather began to change, its form flowing into hers like water soaking into sand. She convulsed, back arching impossibly, a scream tearing from her throat that no human should have been able to produce. I watched in horror as her skin rippled, patterns of light flowing beneath the surface like the symbols on the boulder. When she straightened again, she wasn't Heather anymore. She looked like Heather, same face, same body, but the thing looking out through her eyes was ancient and alien. "Your kind has forgotten us," not Heather said, her voice resonating strangely. "But we inhabited this land long before your ancestors crawled from the sea. We are the first people, the stone people, and we are so very hungry." It took a step toward me. I backed away, my spine pressing against a tree trunk. I was trapped between the forest and the clearing with nowhere to run. "What do you want from me?" I asked, playing for time, desperately searching for an escape route. "A vessel," not Heather replied. "A body to walk among your kind once more. The woman was necessary to bring you here, but her form is unsuitable. You, however." It smiled with Heather's face, a grotesque parody of my friend's warm expression. "You will serve perfectly." "No," I whispered. "No, I won't let you." It laughed again, the sound setting my teeth on edge. "Your permission is not required, Angela Roberts. Only your flesh." Not Heather lunged with inhuman speed, fingers curled into claws. I dove aside, rolling across the damp ground. Pain lanced through my shoulder where it struck a rock, but adrenaline pushed me to my feet again. I ran blindly into the forest, no longer caring about direction or trails, driven only by the primal need to escape. Branches whipped my face, roots caught at my ankles, but terror gave me a grace I'd never possessed, carrying me through the obstacles without falling. Behind me I could hear not Heather pursuing, moving through the forest with unnatural ease. The singing followed me, a constant chorus that seemed to come from the trees themselves, the very earth beneath my feet. It was guiding her to me, I realized. As long as I could hear it, I couldn't hide. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost meaning in that nightmare forest, measured only in ragged breaths and the pounding of my heart. At some point, the rain began again, a torrential downpour that turned the forest floor to treacherous mud. I slipped repeatedly. each fall costing precious seconds as the sounds of pursuit grew closer. Then, miraculously through the curtain of rain, I glimpsed what looked like the main trail. Wider, more defined, with the reassuring blue blazes painted on trees at regular intervals. With renewed energy, I sprinted toward it, sliding down a muddy embankment onto the trail's more solid surface. Left or right? I had no idea which way led back to the parking lot. On instinct, I turned right, forcing my burning legs to keep moving. I'd gone perhaps 50 yards when I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. Voices. Human voices. Ahead on the trail, through the rain, I could make out the shapes of 2 hikers in bright rain gear walking toward me. "Help!" I screamed, waving my arms frantically. "Please, help me." The hikers stopped, clearly startled by my sudden appearance. As I drew closer, I could see they were an older couple, perhaps in their 60s, the man tall and lean, the woman shorter with gray hair peeking from beneath her hood. "Young lady, are you all right?" the man called, concern evident in his voice. I reached them, gasping for breath, words tumbling out incoherently. "My friend, something's happened. We have to get help." "Slow down," the woman said, placing a steadying hand on my arm. "What's happened to your friend?" Before I could answer, the singing rose again, closer now, coming from the direction I'd fled. The couple exchanged confused glances. "What is that sound?" the man asked, peering into the rain-soaked forest. "We need to go now," I urged, pulling at his sleeve. "It's not safe here." "Angela," Heather's voice called from the trees. "Angela, where are you? I'm hurt." For a terrible moment, I hesitated. It sounded like Heather, my friend, not the thing that had taken her. Had I imagined the whole nightmare? Was Heather really injured, needing my help? "Is that your friend?" the woman asked, already moving toward the voice. "No." I grabbed her arm. It's not her. Please, we have to leave." The man frowned, clearly torn between helping a potentially injured hiker and heeding my frantic warning. "Carol, maybe you should stay with her. I'll check on the other young lady." "Don't," I pleaded. "You don't understand what's out there." But he was already moving toward the sound of Heather's voice, disappearing into the rain and mist. Carol gave me a reassuring smile. "My husband was a paramedic before he retired. If your friend is hurt, he'll know what to do." I shook my head, tears mingling with the rain on my face. "You don't understand. That's not my friend anymore." She patted my hand, clearly assuming I was hysterical from whatever accident she imagined had occurred. "It's going to be all right, dear. What's your name?" "Angela," I replied automatically. "Please, we need to get help." Carol nodded. "Richard has our phone. Once he assesses your friend's condition, we can call for assistance if needed. Now, what happened out there?" Before I could answer, a scream cut through the patter of rain, short, strangled, unmistakably male. Carol's expression shifted from calm concern to alarm. "Richard," she called, turning toward the sound. "Richard." No response came from the forest, only the resumption of that eerie singing, louder now, triumphant. Carol took a step toward where her husband had disappeared, but I caught her arm. "We have to run," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." Something in my tone or expression must have convinced her, because she nodded shakily. We turned together and began running down the trail, away from whatever fate had befallen Richard. We hadn't gone far when Carol stumbled, clutching at her chest. "I can't," she gasped. "My heart, I can't run like this." I slowed, supporting her as she fought to catch her breath. The singing was growing louder behind us, joined now by the sound of something moving through the forest parallel to the trail. Not on it, but in the trees beside it, keeping pace with us. "Just a little further," I encouraged, though I had no idea how far we were from safety. "We can make it." Carol nodded grimly, straightening with effort. We continued at a fast walk, her breathing labored beside me. Every few steps I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see not Heather emerge from the trees. Instead, when it came, the attack was from the side. Something burst from the undergrowth in a shower of broken branches and leaves, something that had once been Richard. His rain jacket hung in tatters around a body that moved all wrong, joints bending in impossible directions, face contorted into an expression no human muscles could achieve. Carol's scream died in her throat as her husband's twisted form lunged at her, enveloping her in limbs that stretched and flowed like liquid stone. I stumbled back, watching in horror as the thing that had been Richard began to merge with Carol, her screams shifting to that terrible singing as her body convulsed and transformed. I ran. There was nothing else I could do. I abandoned Carol to the same fate as Heather and Richard, fleeing down the trail with the knowledge that I'd left another person to that nightmare. The trail began to slope downward, the trees thinning slightly. Hope flared as I recognized landmarks from our hike-in. I was nearing the parking area. If I could reach my car, I might escape. Behind me, the singing continued, but it seemed to be falling behind. Whatever had taken Heather and the hiking couple, it moved faster through the forest than on the open trail. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my lungs and the stabbing pain in my side. Then, gloriously, the parking lot appeared through the trees. My car sat where we'd left it, the only vehicle remaining. The other cars we'd seen yesterday were gone, their owners either safely home or… I pushed the thought away, focusing only on escape. I fumbled in my pocket for my keys as I ran, nearly dropping them in my haste. Reaching the car, I unlocked it with trembling hands and threw myself inside, locking the doors immediately. The engine started on the first try, a small mercy I nearly wept with gratitude for. As I shifted into reverse, movement at the trailhead caught my eye. Heather stepped out of the forest, her movements fluid and wrong. Behind her came two more figures, the distorted forms of Richard and Carol. They didn't run toward me, just watched with those terrible black eyes as I backed out of the parking space. I spun the wheel, pointing the car toward the exit, pressing the accelerator to the floor. The tires spun on the wet gravel before finding purchase, launching the car forward. In my rearview mirror, I could see the three figures standing motionless in the rain, watching me flee. The narrow access road seemed endless, each curve revealing only more forest pressing close on either side. I drove too fast for the wet conditions, the car fishtailing on several turns, but fear kept my foot heavy on the gas. Only when I reached the main highway did I allow myself to slow slightly, the presence of other traffic a balm to my shattered nerves. I drove without destination for nearly an hour, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Pachog State Forest. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. Inside, the fluorescent lights and bored cashier were almost unbearably normal. I asked to use the phone, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. The cashier pointed to an old payphone in the corner. Who would I call? The police? What would I tell them? That my friend had been possessed by an ancient entity from the stones? That a hiking couple had been transformed into inhuman monsters before my eyes? Instead, I called my parents. When my mother answered, I broke down, unable to form coherent sentences through my tears. She calmed me enough to get the gas station's address, promising they would come right away. While I waited, I huddled in my car, doors locked, jumping at every shadow. My phone was dead, its battery finally giving out. I kept expecting to see Heather, or the thing wearing Heather's face, appear in the gas station parking lot, that eerie singing preceding her arrival. But nothing came, and 2 hours later, my parents arrived. They took one look at my mud-covered, scratched, and wild-eyed state and asked no questions, simply helped me into their car and drove me home. In the days that followed, I told them a version of the truth, that Heather and I had gotten separated during a sudden storm, that I'd gotten lost and frightened. They assumed the rest was shock and encouraged me to rest. I let them believe it. What else could I do? The police found my car at the gas station and returned it to my parents' house. I couldn't bring myself to drive it. Inside were my keys, my dead phone, and, wrapped in a plastic bag on the passenger seat, a small stone carved with symbols identical to those on the boulder in the forest. I didn't remember taking it. I didn't remember seeing it before at all. I threw it away immediately, but the next morning it was on my nightstand. 3 days after my escape, a news report mentioned 2 missing hikers, Richard and Carol Daniels, last seen setting out for a day hike in Pachog State Forest. A week later, Heather's roommate reported her missing as well. Search parties found nothing. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, no sign that 3 people had vanished without a trace. The cases remain open, the disappearances unexplained. I moved out of state, changing my name and cutting ties with anyone who knew me as Angela Roberts, but I know it won't be enough. Sometimes in the dead of night, I hear the singing, faint but drawing closer, night by night. The stone always returns, no matter how many times I throw it away or how far. They're coming for me, the vessel they chose, and when they find me, I will join Heather and the others in the stones, and we will sing for new vessels to fill. If you're reading this, stay away from Devil's Den. Stay away from the stones that whisper and sing. And if you hear music in the forest that sounds like weeping, run, run, and don't look back. Because we are waiting, we are hungry, and we are coming. My name is Emily Hall, and I am 32 years old. This happened in the summer of 2023, during what was meant to be a rejuvenating hiking trip through the Devil's Hopyard State Park in Connecticut. I'd been battling anxiety for months, and my therapist suggested that reconnecting with nature might help. Find yourself in the wilderness, she said. I wish I had never found what was waiting there instead. I've always been the organized one in our friend group, the planner, the one with backup plans for my backup plans. After my divorce last year, I needed something to focus on, something to remind me I was still capable. So I meticulously researched trails, packed supplies, and convinced my 2 closest friends to join me for a 4-day hiking excursion. Megan Sanders was my college roommate, now a high school art teacher with a carefree spirit that balanced my structured approach to life. Then there was Lily Thompson, the newest addition to our trio, a nurse who'd moved to Connecticut from Oregon just 6 months ago. She was eager to explore the East Coast wilderness, claiming it felt different from what she was used to. She had no idea how right she would be. We arrived at Devil's Hopyard on a Thursday morning. The park was known for its scenic Chapman Falls and curious geological formations, perfectly circular holes carved into the rocks of the falls, which local legends attributed to the devil burning the stone with his tears. Just folklore, I thought at the time. Just silly stories meant to give tourists like us a little shiver before we returned to our comfortable lives. The ranger at the entrance, a weathered man in his 60s named Harold, gave us a peculiar look when I mentioned we planned to explore the northern trails beyond Chapman Falls. "Don't see many hikers heading that way," he said, studying our gear. "Especially not this time of year." "What's wrong with June?" Megan asked, adjusting her backpack. Harold shrugged, his eyes drifting to the dense forest beyond the visitor center. "Nothing wrong with the month. It's just, there's talk of some hikers going missing up there last summer. They were found eventually, but—" He trailed off, then forced a smile. "Just stick to the marked trails. Ladies, and make sure your phones are charged." We thanked him for the warning and headed out. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. Sunlight filtering through the canopy of oak and maple trees, the soothing rush of the 8-mile river beside our trail, birds calling to one another overhead. We set up camp near a small clearing, where Lily insisted on taking photos of every interesting mushroom and plant we encountered. "This place feels ancient," she said as we sat around our campfire that first night. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, making her look momentarily otherworldly, like the trees are watching us. Megan laughed. That's just what Emily needs to hear. Feed her anxiety more creepy thoughts. I forced a smile, though I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was right. There was something about this forest that felt conscious in a way I couldn't articulate. But I dismissed it as my imagination working overtime, a side effect of leaving my medication behind for this trip, wanting to feel everything clearly for once. That night, I dreamt of roots growing into our tent, wrapping around my ankles while I slept. I woke with a gasp at 3:17 a.m., according to my watch. The woods were absolutely silent. No insects, no rustling leaves, no distant calls of nocturnal animals. Just a thick, unnatural silence that pressed against my eardrums. And then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping against the outside of our tent. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone gently drumming their fingers, waiting to be invited in. Megan? Lily, I whispered, but they were both sound asleep, their breathing deep and steady. The tapping continued, moving slowly around the perimeter of the tent. I lay frozen, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain whatever was outside could hear it. Then it stopped directly above my head, followed by what sounded like a deep inhale, as if something was trying to catch my scent through the thin fabric. I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I knew, morning sunlight was warming the tent and Lily was already outside, preparing coffee over a small fire. "You look like hell," she observed when I emerged. "Bad dreams." "Did either of you hear anything strange last night?" I asked. Both shook their heads. Megan yawned and said, "I slept like the dead. First good night's sleep I've had in weeks." I decided not to mention the tapping. We had 3 more days in these woods, and I didn't want to cast a shadow over our trip because of what was probably just a curious raccoon or my own half-dreamed imagination. After breakfast, we packed up and continued northward, following a trail marked only by faded blue blazes on tree trunks. According to my map, we were heading toward an area called Witch Meadow, a name that Megan found delightfully ominous. "Maybe we'll meet a friendly forest witch who will brew us some magical tea," she joked. "Or curse us all," Lily added with a wink. The trail grew narrower as we progressed, in some places nearly disappearing altogether. By midday, the trees had grown taller and closer together, their canopies so thick that little sunlight penetrated to the forest floor. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the air took on a damp, earthy smell that reminded me of a cellar after rain. "Are you sure we're still on the right path?" Megan asked, her earlier enthusiasm fading. I checked my GPS app, but the signal was weakening. "It says we're on track, but—" The blue dot representing our location flickered and jumped, suddenly showing us half a mile east of where I knew we were. "That's weird." "Technology," Lily sighed. "Useless when you actually need it." I pulled out my paper map, always have a backup, but as I tried to orient myself I realized something was wrong. Landmarks that should have been visible weren't there, and the terrain around us didn't match what was indicated on the map. "Let's just backtrack a bit," I suggested, trying to keep the rising panic from my voice. "We must have missed a turn somewhere." We turned around, but after 30 minutes of walking, nothing looked familiar. The forest seemed to have rearranged itself behind us, playing some cruel trick with our sense of direction. The afternoon shadows lengthened, and with them, my anxiety grew. The forest that had seemed so welcoming yesterday now felt oppressive, hostile. "We should set up camp," Lily said finally. "It'll be dark soon, and we'll have better luck finding our way in the morning." I knew she was right, but the thought of spending another night in these woods made my skin crawl. Still, we found a small clearing and began setting up our tent. As I was securing the rainfly, I noticed something odd about the trees surrounding us. Several of them had strange markings carved into their trunks, not the trailblazes we'd been following, but intricate symbols that looked almost like letters in an alphabet I couldn't recognize. "Hey, look at these," I called to the others. "Have you ever seen markings like this before?" Megan came over, tracing one of the symbols with her finger. "They're fresh," she said. "The wood underneath is still light-colored." "Someone else is out here," Lily said, scanning the forest around us with narrowed eyes. "Or something," Megan whispered and then forced a laugh to show she was joking. But none of us found it funny. That night around the campfire, we tried to keep our spirits up by sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. But the usual comfort of friendship felt thin against the growing unease that had settled over us. The forest around our little circle of light seemed to be watching, listening, waiting. "I read something about this area before we came," Lily said suddenly, her voice low. "About why they call it Devil's Hopyard. It wasn't just about those holes in the rocks." Megan and I exchanged glances. "What was it?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know. Lily's face looked ghostly in the firelight. In the 1800s, there was a woman who lived alone in a cabin somewhere in these woods. The locals thought she was a witch because she knew how to heal with plants and lived by herself. One winter, a group of men from the nearby town came and, well, they tried to make her leave. When she refused, they burned her cabin with her inside it. "Jesus, Lily," Megan muttered. But the story goes that she didn't die. Lily continued, ignoring Megan's discomfort. She escaped into the woods, badly burned, and cursed the men and their families. They all died within a year. Strange accidents, sudden illnesses. After that, people said her spirit still wandered these woods, looking for travelers to take revenge on. "That's just a ghost story," I said, more to reassure myself than anything else. "Every forest in New England has some variation of the vengeful witch tale." Lily shrugged. "Maybe, but people still go missing here every few years. They find most of them eventually, but not all. And the ones they do find..." She hesitated. "What about them?" Megan asked. "They're changed somehow. Different. Like something essential was taken from them while they were lost." We fell silent after that, each lost in our own thoughts. The fire crackled, sending sparks up into the night sky. I tried to focus on the stars visible through the gap in the canopy above us, but they seemed unnaturally distant, as if the sky itself had receded. As we prepared for bed, I noticed Lily taking something from her backpack, a small cloth pouch that she placed at the entrance to our tent. "What's that?" I asked. "Just some dried herbs," she said casually. "Rosemary, sage, a bit of sea salt. For protection." "Protection from what?" Megan asked with a nervous laugh. Lily didn't answer, just gave a small smile and climbed into her sleeping bag. That night, the tapping came again. Only this time, it wasn't just outside our tent. It was all around us, coming from dozens of different directions at once. A soft, insistent percussion that seemed to be communicating in some code I couldn't decipher. I lay awake, my body rigid with fear, listening as the tapping gradually synchronized until it matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. Then, cutting through the tapping, came a woman's voice, so close it could have been inside the tent with us. "You're on my land," it whispered, the words barely distinguishable from the rustle of leaves. "You're breathing my air." I wanted to wake my friends, to confirm I wasn't hallucinating, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Paralyzed, I could only listen as the voice continued. "I've been so lonely," it said, a terrible sadness in its tone. "Stay with me. Stay forever." I must have passed out from fear, because the next thing I knew, morning had come again. I sat up with a gasp, my sleeping bag drenched with sweat despite the cool morning air. Megan was already awake, sitting at the entrance to the tent with a troubled expression. "Lily's gone," she said without preamble. What do you mean, gone?" I scrambled to fully wake up, my mind still foggy with sleep and residual fear. I woke up, and she wasn't in her sleeping bag. I thought she might have gone to pee or something. But Megan gestured outside. "Her backpack is still here. Her boots are still here. She's just gone." Panic seized me as I crawled out of the tent. The clearing looked different in the morning light, smaller somehow, the trees pressing in closer than I remembered. Lily's sleeping bag was empty, but undisturbed, as if she'd simply vanished from inside it. "Lily!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the trees. "Lily, where are you?" No answer came back except the mocking calls of distant birds. We spent the next hour searching the immediate area, calling Lily's name until our voices grew hoarse. There was no sign of her, no footprints leading away from the camp, no disturbed undergrowth to indicate which direction she might have gone. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed her whole. "We need to find a ranger," Megan said, her face pale with worry. "We need help." I nodded, but a sinking feeling in my stomach told me that finding our way out of these woods would be far from simple. Still, we packed up our gear, and Lily's too, unable to bear the thought of leaving her things behind, and tried to retrace our steps from the day before. The forest seemed even more maze-like in our desperation. Trails that should have been there weren't, landmarks I remembered had vanished, and the trees all looked identical, their trunks marked with those strange symbols that seemed to multiply overnight. Our phones had no signal, and my GPS app showed us in the middle of a lake that I knew was miles away. "This is impossible," Megan said after hours of fruitless wandering. "We should have hit a main trail by now. It's like the forest is changing around us." I didn't want to admit she might be right. "We just need to keep moving south," I insisted. "Eventually we'll reach the edge of the park." But as the day wore on, exhaustion and fear took their toll. We were walking in circles, I was sure of it, passing the same distinctive rock formations and fallen logs over and over. The sun disappeared behind thick clouds, and the forest darkened prematurely, as if night was falling hours ahead of schedule. We had no choice but to make camp again. Neither of us spoke much as we set up the tent, both too afraid to voice the thoughts spinning in our minds. What had happened to Lily? Would the same thing happen to us? Were we even still in Devil's Hopyard, or had we somehow crossed into somewhere else? That night, I dreamt of Lily. She was standing among the trees, just at the edge of visibility, her back to me. I called to her, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she raised one arm and pointed deeper into the forest, where a soft light glowed between the trees. When I looked back at Lily, she had vanished, but the light remained, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. I woke with a start to find myself standing outside the tent, barefoot in the cold night air. Megan was still asleep inside, but I was at the edge of our little clearing, my feet covered in dirt and scratches as if I'd been walking in my sleep. And there, between the trees, was a light, just like in my dream, a soft glow that seemed to beckon. For a moment, I was tempted to follow it. Something about it felt warm, inviting, like finding a window lit with candlelight after being lost in a storm. But then, I remembered the voice from the night before. "I've been so lonely. Stay with me. Stay forever." And a chill ran down my spine. "No," I whispered to the light, to the forest, to whatever was trying to lure me away. "You can't have me." The light flickered as if in disappointment, then slowly faded. I hurried back to the tent on shaking legs, zipping myself safely inside. But as I tried to fall back asleep, a new sound reached my ears. Soft weeping, a woman's gentle sobs coming from the darkness outside. "Emily." It was Lily's voice, trembling and afraid. "Emily, please help me. I'm lost. I'm so cold." I sat up, heart pounding. It sounded exactly like Lily. Every inflection, every nuance of her voice perfectly replicated. "Emily, please," the voice continued, cracking with emotion. "I can see the light from your tent. Please let me in. Something's out here with me. Something's hunting me." I shook Megan awake, clamping a hand over her mouth before she could speak. Her eyes widened in alarm. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, barely audible. "It sounds like Lily." Megan nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and suspicion. The voice outside continued pleading, growing more desperate by the second. "Please, I'm hurt. My leg. I think it's broken. I can't walk anymore. I've been trying to find you since last night. Please." Megan moved toward the tent entrance, but I grabbed her arm. "Wait," I hissed. Something's not right." "What do you mean?" "It's Lily. We have to help her." But I couldn't shake the feeling of wrongness that crept through me. If she's been looking for us since last night, why are we only hearing her now? And why is she asking us to let her in? She'd know this is her tent too. Megan hesitated, doubt flickering across her face. Outside, the voice changed subtly, a hard edge creeping into its tone. "I know you're awake in there," or "I can hear you whispering. Why won't you help me? I thought we were friends." "That's not Lily," I whispered with sudden certainty. "Whatever it is, it's not her." The voice outside must have heard me, because it changed again, dropping any pretense of humanity. It deepened, multiplied into several voices speaking in unison, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath us. "Open the tent," it commanded, no longer pleading but threatening. "Let me in." Something slammed against the side of our tent, nearly collapsing it. We screamed, clutching each other in terror as whatever was outside began circling, its footsteps heavy enough to shake the earth. The tent fabric bulged inward as if huge hands were pressing against it from all sides. "We have to run," Megan gasped. "On 3, we unzip the tent and sprint. Don't look back, just run." I nodded, my entire body trembling. "1, I whispered. 2, Megan continued, her hand on the zipper. 3, we shouted together, tearing open the tent and bursting out into the darkness. What awaited us outside defied explanation. The clearing was gone, replaced by a strange, misty landscape that looked nothing like the forest we'd camped in. The trees had grown impossibly tall, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes, branches reaching down like grasping hands, and standing among them was a figure, a woman, or something that had once been a woman, her skin blackened as if burned, her eyes glowing with the same light I'd seen between the trees earlier. "My land," she whispered, her voice the same that had spoken to me 2 nights before. "My air, my forest." "Run!" Megan screamed, pulling me by the arm. We fled blindly into the mist, branches whipping at our faces, roots seeming to rise from the ground to trip us. Behind us, the burned woman's laughter echoed, multiplying until it seemed to come from every direction. We ran until our lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would collapse beneath me. The mist grew thicker, disorienting us further. I lost my grip on Megan's arm, and suddenly she was gone, vanished into the white haze. "Megan!" I cried out, spinning around desperately. "Megan!" Silence answered me. I was alone in the mist, in this twisted version of the forest that had trapped us. I stood still, trying to control my panicked breathing, straining to hear any sound that might lead me to Megan. Instead, I heard singing, a soft, lilting melody in a language I didn't recognize. Following the sound, I pushed through the mist until I came to a small clearing. In its center stood a cabin, ancient and weathered, its windows glowing with warm light. The singing came from inside. Everything in me screamed to run the other way, but some deeper instinct told me that whatever answers I sought would be found inside that cabin. With trembling hands, I approached the door and pushed it open. The interior was a single room, illuminated by dozens of candles. Herbs hung from the ceiling, drying in bunches. A large wooden table dominated the space, covered with jars, bottles, and what looked like bones. And seated at the table, her back to me, was Lily. "Lily," I whispered, hardly daring to hope. She turned, and I staggered back in horror. It was Lily's face, but her eyes were wrong, completely black, without iris or white, like holes opening onto an infinite darkness. "You came," she said, her voice overlaid with others, as if multiple people were speaking through her mouth. "We hoped you would." "What? What happened to you?" I managed to ask. "What is this place?" Lily Thing smiled, revealing teeth that had been filed to points. "This is her home, has been for centuries. She was here before the colonists, before their towns and their laws and their witch hunts. And she'll be here long after." The woman in the forest, the burned woman. Agnes, Lilything corrected. "Her name is Agnes, and she's been very patient, watching people hike through her woods, waiting for the right ones, waiting for those who might be compatible." "Compatible for what?" I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. "For merging," Lilything said simply. "For becoming part of her, part of the forest. Like I have." She gestured to herself. "It doesn't hurt, not really. It feels like becoming more than you were, shedding limitations." I backed toward the door but found it gone, just a solid wall where it had been moments before. "You can't leave," Lilything said, almost apologetically. "Agnes has chosen you, just like she chose me the moment we entered her woods. She saw something in me, a willingness perhaps, an openness to becoming something new." "And Megan?" I asked, my voice breaking. Lilything's expression darkened. "Megan fought. She rejected the gift. Agnes doesn't like that." A scream tore through the night outside, Megan's voice filled with agony and terror. I pounded on the wall where the door had been. "Megan, I'm coming! Hold on!" "It's too late for her," Lilything said, rising from the table with unnatural grace. "But not for you, Emily. You can still choose the easier path. Accept Agnes's gift willingly, and the transition will be painless. Fight, and—" She gestured toward the sounds of Megan's continued screams. I looked around frantically for a weapon, for an escape, for anything that might help me. My eyes fell on a jar near the edge of the table, filled with what looked like ashes and labeled with one of the strange symbols I'd seen carved into the trees. "That won't help you," Lilything said, following my gaze. "Nothing here will. Everything in this cabin belongs to Agnes. Everything in these woods belongs to Agnes, including you." She stepped closer, reaching for me with hands that seemed too long, fingers tapering into points that looked more like twigs than human digits. I backed away until I hit the wall, my mind racing desperately. Then I remembered Lily's protection pouch, the herbs she'd placed at our tent entrance. She had known something, had tried to protect us in her own way before whatever was left of her in this thing before me had been consumed. "Rosemary," I said suddenly. "Sage, sea salt." Lilything hissed, recoiling slightly. "Superstitions. They won't save you here." But I saw the flicker of uncertainty in those black eyes, the momentary hesitation in her advance. I reached into my pocket where I'd absently stuffed Lily's pouch that morning while packing up camp. "For protection," I said, pulling it out. "That's what you said, right, Lily? If any part of you is still in there, you know this was meant to keep us safe." Lilything snarled, the sound inhuman. "That's not Lily anymore. Lily is gone. There is only Agnes now, only the forest." I untied the pouch with shaking fingers, spilling its contents into my palm. Dried herbs, crystals, and salt. Without knowing exactly what I was doing, but driven by desperate instinct, I threw the mixture at Lilything's face. The effect was immediate and shocking. Lilything shrieked, a sound that shattered several jars on the table, her skin blistering where the herbs and salt had touched her. She clawed at her face, black ichor seeping from the wounds instead of blood. Behind me, the door reappeared. I didn't hesitate, flinging it open and running out into the night. The mist had thinned, and in the distance, I could still hear Megan's cries. I ran toward them, no longer caring about what might be waiting for me, only knowing I couldn't leave her behind. I found her at the base of a massive oak tree, its trunk split open like a mouth. Branches wrapped around her body, slowly pulling her inside. Her eyes were wide with terror, her skin bleeding where the bark had scraped against it. "Emily," she gasped when she saw me. "Help me, please." I grabbed her arms, trying to pull her free, but the tree's grip was too strong. The branches tightened, making Megan cry out in pain. "You can't save her," came a voice from behind me. I turned to see the burned woman, Agnes, standing just feet away, her charred skin cracked to reveal glowing embers beneath. She's already becoming part of me, part of my forest. Let her go, I demanded, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. Let us both go. Agnes tilted her head, studying me with those glowing eyes. Why would I do that? You're trespassers. This is my land. An idea formed in my mind. Desperate, probably futile, but the only chance we had. If we're on your land, then we're your guests, I said, and there are rules about hospitality, aren't there? Rules older than your forest. Agnes went very still, the glow in her eyes flickering. You know nothing of the old rules, child. I know enough, I bluffed. I know that a host who harms her guests invites a curse upon herself and her domain. I know that even the oldest powers must respect the boundaries of hospitality. It was nonsense, pieced together from half-remembered folklore and fantasy novels, but delivered with a conviction born of fear and desperation. To my shock, Agnes hesitated, the branches holding Megan loosening slightly. A clever one, she murmured. It's been so long since anyone has invoked the old ways against me, so long since anyone remembered. I pressed my advantage. Release her. Release us both, and we swear never to return to your woods, never to speak of what we've seen here. Agnes considered this, her burned face unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. Very well. The girl goes free, but there must be payment. Hospitality demands an exchange. What do you want? I asked, dreading the answer. A memory, Agnes said, from each of you, a precious one, something you cherish. I looked at Megan, still half absorbed into the tree, her eyes pleading with me. We accept, I said without hesitation. Agnes smiled, revealing teeth like scorched wood. Wise choice. She approached us, placing one blackened hand on Megan's forehead and the other on mine. A sensation like ice water flooded my mind, rummaging through my memories until it seized upon one, my 12th birthday, the last happy day with my mother before her illness took her. I felt it being pulled from me, unraveling like thread from a sweater, leaving a cold emptiness in its place. Beside me, Megan whimpered as her own memory was taken. The tree released her, branches retreating, the opening in the trunk sealing shut. Now go, Agnes commanded. Follow the path that appears before you. Do not stray from it. Do not look back. And do not return. Ever. A narrow trail of phosphorescent mushrooms appeared, cutting through the dark forest like a ribbon of blue-green light. Supporting Megan, who was weak and disoriented, I began to follow it. What about Lily? I asked, pausing. Is she truly gone? Agnes's expression softened momentarily, almost pitying. She chose to stay. She gave herself willingly. Some people are drawn to the forest, to its secrets and its power. She belongs to it now, as it belongs to her. I wanted to argue, to fight for my friend, but the emptiness in my mind where my precious memory had been warned me of Agnes's power. Instead, I turned and led Megan down the glowing path, forcing myself not to look back even when I heard Lily's voice calling my name one last time. We walked for what seemed like hours, the path of mushrooms guiding us through a forest that gradually became more familiar, less twisted and wrong. Eventually, we emerged at the edge of a parking lot, the main visitor center of Devil's Hopyard State Park. Our car was there, just as we'd left it 3 days ago. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. We stood there in silence, Megan and I, dirty and bloodied and changed in ways we couldn't yet fully comprehend. A park ranger approached us, concern on his face. "Are you ladies all right? You look like you've had a rough night." "We got lost," I said simply. Our friend is still out there." The search for Lily lasted 2 weeks. They found her backpack and boots where we'd left them, but no other trace. Eventually, they called it off. Another missing hiker in the statistics of Devil's Hopyard. Megan and I tried to explain what had happened, but our stories sounded deranged even to our own ears. and with each passing day, the details grew fuzzier, the experience more distant, as if the forest itself was reclaiming our memories of it. 2 months later, I received a postcard in the mail. It showed Chapman Falls, the water cascading down over those eerily perfect holes in the rock. There was no return address, no signature, just a short message in handwriting I recognized immediately as Lily's. "I'm happy here, Emily. The forest is vast and ancient and beautiful beyond imagining. Sometimes, when the moon is right, I can almost remember being human. Don't worry about me, but remember your promise. Never return to these woods. They're mine now, as I am theirs." I burned the postcard that night and moved to Arizona the following week, as far from Connecticut forests as I could manage. I still have nightmares about tapping sounds outside my window, about black eyes and burned skin and trees that move in ways trees shouldn't. And sometimes I find myself standing outside at night, staring at distant woods, feeling a tug of familiarity, of belonging. In those moments, I understand what drew Lily to stay, what made her choose to become something other than human. There's a power in the ancient places of the world, a power that remembers when humans were just another animal to be hunted. I don't know what memory Agnes took from Megan. She moved away shortly after I did, cutting off all contact. But I know what she took from me, my last good day with my mother. I can recall that it happened, can describe the party and the gifts in clinical detail, but the emotional core is gone, an empty space where love and warmth should be. It seems a small price to pay for our lives, but in my darkest moments, I wonder if we truly escaped it all, or if part of us is still there. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 34 years old. This happened in Connecticut last fall, when the forests were ablaze with autumn colors and the air carried the first whispers of winter. I'd been working at Hartford Financial for nearly a decade, rising through the ranks until I found myself managing a team of 6 dedicated but overworked analysts. After a particularly grueling quarter, I decided we needed more than just the typical happy hour to decompress. We needed to disconnect completely from our devices, our spreadsheets, and the fluorescent lights that had been slowly draining our souls. "A weekend hiking trip," I announced during our Friday meeting. "Sleeping Giant State Park. 3 days, 2 nights." The responses varied: enthusiasm from Tyler and Diane, hesitation from Rachel and Marcus, and outright reluctance from Nora and Kevin. But I was their manager, and while I couldn't mandate attendance, I could be persuasive. By the following Monday, all 6 had confirmed. I'd chosen Sleeping Giant for its proximity, just a 45-minute drive from Hartford, and its reputation. The park earned its name from the mountain silhouette, which resembles a giant lying on its back. I'd hiked there several times before, always sticking to the marked trails, always returning before dusk. This time would be different. I'd researched some off-trail areas, secret spots where we could truly immerse ourselves in nature without the weekend crowds. What I hadn't researched were the local legends. We arrived early Friday morning, the air crisp with the scent of decaying leaves. The parking lot was nearly empty, a benefit of taking a day off work when most people were chained to their desks. "This is it?" Kevin asked, eyeing the trailhead with suspicion. His city sensibilities were already showing. He'd worn new hiking boots that would undoubtedly give him blisters by midday. "This is just the beginning," I assured him, shouldering my pack. "Wait until you see where we're camping." Nora checked her phone. "No service. Great." "That's the point," I reminded her. "Disconnect to reconnect." Marcus, always the one to lighten the mood, started singing The Sound of Silence dramatically until Rachel shoved him playfully. Tyler and Diane were already ahead, pointing out birds and plants with the enthusiasm of people who'd spent too much time indoors. I smiled, feeling that I'd made the right decision. The main trail was wide and well-maintained, climbing steadily through dense forests of oak, maple, and birch. The leaves crunched beneath our feet, occasionally giving way to reveal bare patches of rocky soil. We passed a few other hikers who nodded politely but said nothing. By midday, we'd reached the first lookout point. The view was breathtaking. Rolling hills covered in a patchwork quilt of red, orange, and gold, stretching all the way to the distant shimmer of the Quinnipiac River. "Worth the climb?" I asked, passing around a water bottle. "I'll admit it," Kevin said, wiping sweat from his brow. "This is pretty spectacular." We ate lunch there, perched on sun-warmed rocks, talking about everything except work. It felt good to see them as people rather than employees, to learn about Diane's passion for mycology and Marcus's childhood in rural Maine. But as we prepared to continue, an elderly hiker paused near our group. He was thin but wiry, with the leathered skin of someone who'd spent decades outdoors. His eyes, however, caught my attention. Pale blue and unnervingly intense. "Heading up to the tower?" he asked, gesturing to the stone observation tower visible on the mountain's highest point. "Eventually," I said, "but we're camping overnight first." His expression shifted subtly. "The park closes at sunset." "We have a special permit," I lied smoothly. There was no such thing, but we wouldn't be on the official campsites anyway. He studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the western ridge. "Stay off the Quinnipiac Trail after dark, especially past the old quarry." "Why's that?" Tyler asked. The man's gaze shifted to him. "The giant doesn't like being disturbed when he's sleeping." With that cryptic warning, he continued down the trail, his walking stick tapping rhythmically against the stones. "Well, that wasn't ominous at all," Rachel muttered. I laughed it off. Local color. Every park has its legends. But as we resumed our hike, now veering west toward the less traveled paths, I couldn't shake the old man's words from my mind. I'd never been superstitious, but there was something about the wilderness that made such warnings seem less ridiculous than they would in the fluorescent reality of our office. The Quinnipiac Trail was narrower and rougher than the main path, winding through stands of hemlock so dense they blocked much of the sunlight. The temperature dropped noticeably, and our breath began to form small clouds in the cooling air. "How much farther?" Nora asked, adjusting her pack for the dozenth time. She was struggling the most, having rarely exercised beyond her occasional yoga classes. "Not far," I promised, though in truth I wasn't entirely sure. The spot I'd found online, a small clearing near a seasonal stream, had seemed closer on the map. As the afternoon waned, we passed the abandoned quarry the old man had mentioned. Operations had ceased decades ago, leaving behind a gaping wound in the mountainside. Enormous blocks of trap rock lay scattered like discarded toys, some covered in lichen and moss, others still bearing the marks of drills and chisels. "This is creepy," Diane said, her voice hushed as if the quarry might hear her. "It's just rocks," Kevin said, though he too spoke more quietly than usual. We paused to rest, the silence of the place pressing against our ears. No birds sang here, and even the wind seemed reluctant to enter this man-made hollow. "Did you hear that?" Marcus suddenly asked. We all froze, straining to listen. "Hear what?" I whispered. "Like scraping. Stone on stone." We waited, but the sound, if there had been one, didn't repeat. "Probably just settling," I said. "These rocks have been here for years." But as we gathered our things to leave, I noticed something I hadn't seen when we arrived. A crude figure carved into one of the rock faces, partially obscured by lichen. It resembled a stick figure but with elongated limbs and an oversized head. Below it were symbols I didn't recognize, though they looked old. I decided not to point it out to the others. Beyond the quarry, the trail became increasingly difficult to follow. Fallen trees blocked our path in several places, and twice we had to backtrack after hitting dead ends. The sun was sinking rapidly now, painting the forest in deepening shades of amber and bronze. "Margaret, we need to find this campsite soon," Tyler said, voicing what everyone was thinking. "We don't want to be setting up tents in the dark." He was right. I checked my paper map again, trying to reconcile it with the increasingly unfamiliar terrain. According to my calculations, the clearing should have been just ahead, but all I could see was more dense forest. "Let's try over this ridge," I suggested, pointing to a slight rise to our left. "I think we may have drifted too far north." The ridge was steeper than it had appeared, and by the time we reached the top, dusk had fully settled. But our efforts were rewarded. Below us lay a small clearing beside a trickling stream, just as I'd hoped. "Thank God," Nora sighed, already shrugging off her pack. We descended quickly, eager to set up camp before we lost all light. The clearing was perfect. Flat, relatively free of rocks, with enough space for our 3 tents. The stream provided a gentle soundtrack that partly masked the growing silence of the forest. Within an hour, we had a small campfire going and our tents pitched in a rough circle around it. Dinner was simple: dehydrated meals rehydrated with boiled stream water. But after the day's hike, it tasted incredible. We passed around a flask of whiskey that Marcus had smuggled in, its warmth spreading through our tired bodies. As night fully claimed the forest, our conversation grew quieter, more intimate. Work stories gave way to personal confessions. Rachel's fear of never finding a partner, Kevin's estrangement from his father, Diane's struggle with anxiety. The firelight cast flickering shadows on their faces, making them seem at once familiar and strange. "Your turn, boss," Marcus said, passing me the flask. "Tell us something we don't know about Margaret Wilson." I took a sip, considering. "I'm afraid of the dark," I admitted. "Not like normal darkness, absolute darkness. The kind where you can't see your hand in front of your face." "Nyctophobia," Diane supplied. "It's quite common." "And yet you brought us camping in the woods," Nora observed. I shrugged. "Facing fears and all that. Besides, we have the fire." As if on cue, a log shifted in the flames, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. We all watched them rise and fade, tiny stars dying before our eyes. "Does anyone know any ghost stories?" Tyler asked, his face eager in the firelight. "Seems mandatory for camping." "I know one," Rachel said quietly. "A local one, actually. About this mountain." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. "The old man and his warning got you thinking?" I asked. She nodded. "I looked it up before we left. The legend of Sleeping Giant." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "They say the mountain isn't a natural formation at all, but the body of a malevolent spirit that plagued the Quinnipiac tribe centuries ago. The spirit would steal children, cause crops to fail, bring disease. So a benevolent deity enchanted it into a deep sleep, transforming it into the mountain we see today." "Let me guess," Kevin said. "If it wakes up, bad things happen?" Rachel nodded. "The legend says it stirs sometimes when people disturb its rest. There are stories of hikers going missing, especially near the old quarry. The stone cutting was said to be like cutting into the giant's flesh." An uncomfortable silence followed her words. The fire crackled and hissed, suddenly seeming smaller against the vast darkness of the forest. "Well, on that cheerful note," I said, standing, "I'm going to fill our water bottles for the morning." "Want company?" Tyler offered. "I'm good, just going to the stream. Back in a minute." I grabbed our water bottles and my headlamp, moving away from the fire's glow. The stream was only about 20 yards away, but without the firelight the forest was alarmingly dark. My headlamp carved a narrow tunnel of visibility through the blackness. As I knelt by the stream, I noticed something odd. The water was moving much faster than it had been when we arrived, and there seemed to be more of it. It gurgled and splashed against the rocks with surprising force for what had been a gentle trickle earlier. Probably just runoff from higher up the mountain, I reasoned. Maybe a beaver dam broke somewhere upstream. But as I filled the bottles, another sound reached me. A low, rhythmic rumbling that I felt more than heard. It reminded me of the subway passing beneath the streets of New York, a deep vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. I froze, water bottle half submerged, listening intently. The rumbling stopped. just my imagination, or distant thunder. I told myself, though the sky had been clear all day. I finished filling the bottles quickly, suddenly eager to return to the others. But as I stood, my headlamp caught something across the stream, a shape that didn't belong among the trees and rocks. I raised my light, trying to get a better look. 2 reflective points shone back at me, about 7 feet off the ground. Eyes. My breath caught. They were too high to be a deer or bear, too widely spaced, too aware. They blinked once, slowly, and then were gone, leaving only the normal nighttime forest. I backed away, then turned and hurried to the campfire, trying to keep my pace normal despite the hammering of my heart. "Everything okay?" Diane asked as I returned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied, setting down the water bottles. "Just thought I saw something across the stream. Probably a deer." But I kept glancing back toward the darkness beyond our camp, searching for those reflective eyes. The conversation resumed, but with less energy than before. One by one, my colleagues began to yawn and make their way to their tents. Tyler and Diane shared one, Marcus and Kevin another, while Rachel, Nora, and I had the largest. "Don't let the giant get you," Marcus joked as he zipped himself into his tent. Soon, only Rachel and I remained by the dying fire. "You really saw something out there, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I poked the embers with a stick, watching the flare of orange. "I don't know what I saw. Probably nothing." She studied me for a moment. "You know, the Quinnipiac believed the giant could only hurt you if you showed fear. That's why they would sing when they passed this mountain, to show they weren't afraid." "Good thing I brought you all to boost my courage then," I said, attempting a smile. We banked the fire and retreated to our tent, where Nora was already breathing deeply in sleep. Despite my exhaustion, I lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the forest and the increasingly insistent rush of the stream, which now sounded almost like footsteps crushing the fallen leaves. I must have eventually drifted off, because I woke suddenly to complete silence. The stream had stopped. Even the night insects were quiet. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. The silence was oppressive, pressing against my ears like a physical force. I sat up carefully, trying not to disturb Rachel and Nora. The inside of the tent was pitch black, triggering the very fear I'd confessed earlier. I fumbled for my headlamp, needing its reassurance. But when I switched it on, nothing happened. I tried again, clicking the button rapidly. Nothing. The batteries had been new. There was no reason for it to fail. A rustling sound came from outside, like something large moving through the underbrush. I held my breath, listening intently. The sound circled our campsite once, methodically before stopping directly outside our tent. I reached over to wake Rachel, but my hand found only her empty sleeping bag. "Rachel," I whispered, panic rising in my throat. No response. I turned to Nora, shaking her shoulder roughly. "Nora, wake up." She groaned and rolled over. "What time is it?" "Rachel's gone," I hissed. That got her attention. She sat up, instantly alert. "What do you mean, gone?" "She's not in her sleeping bag, and there's something outside." As if to confirm my words, a low scraping sound came from the tent wall nearest us, like stone dragging against the fabric. Nora's eyes widened. "What the hell is that?" Before I could answer, a voice called from outside, Rachel's voice, but strange, flat. "Margaret, can you come out here? I found something." I exchanged a glance with Nora. Something wasn't right. "Rachel," I called back, "are you okay?" "I'm fine, but you need to see this. Come outside." The wrongness in her voice made my skin crawl. It was Rachel's voice, but it lacked any inflection, any humanity. "I'll go check the other tents," Nora whispered, reaching for the zipper. I grabbed her wrist. "Don't. Something's not right." "Margaret?" Rachel's voice came again, closer to the tent now. "Why won't you come out? Don't you trust me?" The zipper of our tent began to move, slowly rising from the bottom. Neither Nora nor I was touching it. Panic overrode my fear. I lunged forward, grabbing the zipper from the inside and holding it down with all my strength. Nora joined me, her hands white-knuckled beside mine. "Rachel, we're not comfortable right now," I called, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Why don't you go wake the others if you found something interesting?" A pause. Then, "They're already awake. They're with me. We're all waiting for you." Nora shook her head violently. "That's not Rachel," she mouthed. The zipper jerked violently in our hands, pulled by something much stronger than either of us. We lost our grip, and it shot upward, revealing the darkness outside. But there was no one there, just the empty clearing, our banked fire now cold ash and the other tents standing undisturbed in the moonlight. "What the hell?" Nora breathed. I peered out, scanning the campsite. Everything looked normal, except the stream, I whispered. "It's gone." Where the trickling water had been was now only a dry stream bed, as if it hadn't held water for years. "We need to check on the others," I said, my fear temporarily overwhelmed by concern for my team. We crawled out of the tent, moving cautiously across the clearing. The night was unnaturally still, the air cold and dense, like we were moving through water. "Tyler, Diane," I called softly as we approached their tent. No response. I reached for the zipper, hesitated, then pulled it open in one quick motion. Empty. 2 sleeping bags, neatly arranged, but no people. "This isn't happening," Nora muttered, her voice cracking. "This isn't real." We moved to the other tent. Again, empty sleeping bags. No Marcus, no Kevin. "We need to get help," Nora said, her voice rising with panic. "We need to get out of here." I nodded, trying to think clearly through my fear. "We'll follow the trail back. It's downhill. Even in the dark, we should be able to—" A twig snapped in the forest behind us. We both whirled around. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. In the dim moonlight, it appeared to be Rachel, but something was wrong with her proportions. Her limbs seemed too long, her head tilted at an impossible angle. "Margaret," she said in that flat voice, "why did you bring us here?" I backed away, pulling Nora with me. "That's not Rachel," I whispered. "You shouldn't have come past the quarry," the thing that wasn't Rachel continued. "You woke him up. Now he's hungry." As it spoke, more figures emerged from the trees. Tyler, Diane, Marcus, and Kevin, all with the same wrongness to their forms, all staring at us with eyes that reflected the moonlight like animals. "Run," I breathed to Nora. "Run, now." We bolted for the trail, the one leading away from the quarry, away from the heart of the mountain. Behind us, there was no pursuit, no sound at all, just the eerie silence and the knowledge that the things wearing our friends' faces were watching us flee. The trail was barely visible in the darkness, but fear drove us forward, stumbling over roots and rocks. My lungs burned and branches whipped at my face, but I didn't slow. Nora was just ahead of me, her ragged breathing matching my own. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsing finally on a wide section of trail that I recognized as part of the main loop. We were at least a mile from our campsite, heading downhill toward the park entrance. "What?" Nora gasped. "What was that? What happened to them?" I shook my head, unable to form words through my terror and exhaustion. The old man's warning echoed in my mind. The giant doesn't like being disturbed when he's sleeping. As our breathing slowed, the silence of the forest became oppressive again. No insects, no wind in the trees, nothing. "We need to keep moving," I said finally, forcing myself to my feet. "We need to get to the car." Nora nodded, but as she stood, she suddenly went rigid, staring over my shoulder. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. Rachel stood there, about 20 yards up the trail, her form silhouetted against the night sky. But it wasn't Rachel, Not really. Her proportions were all wrong, her arms hanging too low, her neck bent at an angle that would be fatal for a human. "You can't leave," she said, her voice still flat but somehow reaching us clearly despite the distance. "The giant is awake now. He wants to meet you." My mind raced. The legends Rachel had told us, could they possibly be true? Had we somehow woken the malevolent spirit that the mountain imprisoned? "What do you want?" I called, my voice surprisingly steady. The thing wearing Rachel's form tilted its head further, until it was nearly upside down. "To be whole again. The quarry took pieces of him. He needs new pieces now." It took a step toward us, then another, moving with a jerking gait that was both mechanical and fluid. "Go," I told Nora, never taking my eyes off the approaching figure. "I'll distract it. Run for the car." "I'm not leaving you," she hissed. "Yes, you are. Get help." Before she could argue further, I moved to the side of the trail, putting distance between us. The Rachel thing followed my movement with its gaze, seemingly more interested in me than Nora. "You're the one who brought them here," it said. "You're the one he wants most." I swallowed hard. "Then come and get me." Nora hesitated, then took advantage of the moment to slip away down the trail. The creature didn't seem to notice, its attention fixed entirely on me. It moved closer, its movements becoming more fluid, more human, which somehow made it even more terrifying. In the moonlight, I could see that while its shape was Rachel's, its skin had an odd texture, like stone that had been weathered by centuries of wind and rain. "What are you?" I asked, backing away. It smiled, showing teeth that gleamed like polished granite. "I am the mountain. I am the giant, and you woke me up." I turned and ran. Not in the direction Nora had gone, but sideways, off the trail and into the dense forest. I had no plan beyond leading this thing away from my remaining colleague, giving her a chance to find help. The forest floor was treacherous in the darkness. Roots grabbed at my ankles, branches lashed my face, and more than once I nearly ran headlong into a tree. But terror gave me speed and agility I didn't know I possessed. Behind me, I could hear it coming, not running, but moving with a steady, inexorable pace, branches snapping under its weight. It wasn't hurrying. It didn't need to. This was its domain. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst, until my legs threatened to collapse beneath me. And still it followed, never tiring, never slowing. Then my foot caught on an exposed root, and I went down hard, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Pain shot through my ankle, sprained, maybe broken. I tried to rise, but my leg buckled beneath me. I was done. I couldn't run anymore. The creature that had been Rachel emerged from the trees, moving with that unsettling, jerky grace. In the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy, I could see that its transformation had progressed. Its skin now clearly stone, cracked and weathered, with moss growing in the crevices. Only its eyes remained human, watching me with Rachel's gentle brown gaze. "Why?" I gasped, pressing my back against a tree trunk. "Why are you doing this?" It crouched beside me, head tilting curiously. The mountain sleeps, but sometimes it dreams, and sometimes its dreams walk. It reached out with a hand that was now more claw than human. "Your friend told our story. You should have listened." Its fingers, cold and hard as stone, touched my cheek. I flinched away, but there was nowhere to go. "The others are part of us now," it said. "They dream the mountain's dreams. Soon, you will too." I closed my eyes, waiting for whatever would come next. But instead of pain, I heard a new sound. Voices calling in the distance. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, bobbing between the trees. The creature hissed, drawing back. "They cannot have you. You are ours." It grabbed my arm, pulling me to my feet. Despite my injured ankle, it dragged me deeper into the forest, away from the approaching lights and voices. I tried to scream, but its other hand, now completely transformed into a stone claw, clamped over my mouth. "Silence," it growled, its voice no longer Rachel's but something ancient and inhuman. "The mountain demands silence." I bit down hard on the stone fingers, expecting to break my teeth. But instead, there was a crumbling sensation, and the creature shrieked, a sound like wind howling through a narrow canyon. It released me, staring at its damaged hand in apparent shock. I fell backward, landing hard on the forest floor. The creature loomed over me, its form now barely human at all, a rough approximation of a person carved from living stone, with only Rachel's eyes remaining to remind me of my colleague. "You cannot hurt the mountain," it hissed. "The mountain is eternal." "Rachel isn't," I said, finding courage in desperation. "Rachel is a person, a human being, not a dream, not a puppet for your mountain." Something flickered in those human eyes, recognition, confusion, fear. "Rachel," I pressed. "Rachel, if you're in there, fight it. This isn't you." The creature shuddered, its stone form seeming to ripple like water. "Not Rachel," it growled, but with less conviction. "Yes, you are," I insisted. "Rachel Davis, analyst. You have a cat named Pepper. You bring donuts every Friday. You're afraid of never finding someone to love. You're a person, Rachel. Not a mountain, not a dream." The human eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw my colleague looking out from behind them, terrified, confused, but herself. "Margaret," Rachel's voice emerged, cracked and faint. "What's happening to me?" Before I could answer, the stone creature convulsed violently. A deep rumbling shook the ground, not just beneath us but all around us, as if the entire mountain was trembling. "He's angry," Rachel gasped, her voice fading in and out like a bad radio signal. "The giant, he's waking up, really waking up." The voices and flashlights were closer now. I could hear people calling my name, Nora's voice among them. "Here," I shouted. "We're over here." The stone creature that was partly Rachel growled, reaching for me again. But its movements were jerky, uncoordinated, as if two forces were fighting for control of its body. "Run," Rachel's voice urged. "I can't. Hold it. Back much longer." "I'm not leaving you," I said, echoing Nora's words to me earlier. "You have to. It wants you. It wants all of you, to replace what was taken from the quarry." Her stone face contorted in pain. "Go. Please." The rumbling beneath us intensified. Small rocks and dead leaves began to vibrate across the forest floor. In the distance, I heard the crack and crash of falling trees. The creature stumbled backward, Rachel's consciousness seemingly winning the battle momentarily. "Find the others," she gasped. "In the quarry, they're still alive, sort of, like me." Hope surged through me. "Tyler, Diane, they're okay? Not okay, but not gone. Find them, before the giant fully wakes." She clutched her head, stone fingers gouging furrows in her granite scalp. "It's coming back. I can't fight it anymore. Run!" The creature lunged at me, but its movements were slow, hesitant. Rachel's final gift to me. I rolled away, ignoring the pain in my ankle, and pulled myself up using a nearby tree. The flashlight beams were visible now, cutting through the trees less than 100 yards away. I started toward them, hobbling as fast as my injured ankle would allow. Behind me, the creature roared, a sound of ancient fury that shook the leaves from the branches above. The ground heaved beneath my feet, nearly sending me sprawling again. "Margaret!" Nora's voice called. "Where are you?" "Here," I shouted back. "I'm here." The lights swung in my direction, and moments later figures burst through the underbrush. Nora, accompanied by 3 park rangers in uniform. "Oh, thank God," she sobbed, rushing to my side. "I thought you were dead." Ms. Wilson," one of the rangers asked, steadying me as I swayed on my feet. "Are you injured?" "My ankle," I said. "But that doesn't matter. My friends, they're in trouble. At the quarry. We need to find them." The rangers exchanged glances. "Ma'am, we need to get you medical attention first. And there's some kind of seismic activity happening. The whole area is unstable." "No, you don't understand," I insisted. "They're still alive. Rachel told me." I turned to point to where the stone creature had been, but there was nothing there. Just empty forest, shivering in the growing tremors. "Rachel?" Nora asked, looking around. "You found her?" I hesitated, realizing how insane my story would sound. "It's complicated, but I know where the others are. We have to go to the quarry." "Ma'am, that's not possible right now," the lead ranger said firmly. "The trails in that area are showing signs of imminent collapse. We need to evacuate the park immediately." As if to emphasize his point, a massive cracking sound split the night, like the breaking of enormous bones. The ground lurched beneath us, sending all of us staggering. "The giant," I whispered. "He's waking up." The ranger grabbed my arm. "We need to move, now. The whole ridge might be coming down." They half-carried, half-dragged me down the mountain, following emergency routes that bypassed the main trails. Behind us, the rumbling and cracking continued, punctuated by the crash of falling trees. Twice we had to change course as sections of trail crumbled away before our eyes. By the time we reached the parking lot, dawn was breaking over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that belied the terror of the night. Emergency vehicles filled the lot. Police cars, ambulances, even a geological survey truck. As a paramedic examined my ankle, I tried again to explain about my missing colleagues. "There are 4 people still on the mountain," I insisted. "In the quarry. We have to find them." The rangers conferred with police officers, their expressions grave. Finally, the lead ranger approached me. "Ms. Wilson, we've dispatched search teams to the quarry area, but the situation is extremely dangerous. The entire western face of the mountain is showing signs of structural instability." He hesitated. "Can you tell me exactly what happened to your friends?" I looked at Nora, who nodded encouragingly. But how could I explain what I'd seen? What would happen to me if I told the truth? That the mountain had somehow possessed my colleagues, turning them into stone creatures that served some ancient, malevolent entity? "We got separated in the night," I said finally. "I think they may have gotten lost and sought shelter in the quarry." It wasn't entirely a lie. The ranger nodded, accepting this more plausible explanation. "We'll do everything we can to find them." But I knew they wouldn't. Not as they were, not as people. The mountain had claimed them, just as it had tried to claim me. Nora and I were transported to Yale New Haven Hospital, where my ankle was diagnosed as a severe sprain rather than a break. They kept me overnight for observation, concerned about my elevated heart rate and blood pressure. Nora stayed with me, neither of us willing to be alone after what we'd experienced. We didn't talk much about what had happened on the mountain. What was there to say that wouldn't sound like the ravings of traumatized minds? The next morning, a police detective came to take our statements. He informed us that the search for our colleagues had been suspended due to dangerous conditions on the mountain. A series of tremors, officially classified as a minor seismic event, had caused significant structural damage to the western face, particularly around the old quarry, which had partially collapsed. "We'll resume the search as soon as conditions stabilize," he assured us. "But I should prepare you, with the extent of the damage to that area, if your friends were in or near the quarry when the collapse occurred." He didn't need to finish the sentence. After he left, Nora finally broke our unspoken agreement not to discuss that night. "It wasn't an earthquake, was it?" she asked quietly, her eyes fixed on the hospital window where Sleeping Giant was just visible on the horizon, its profile unchanged despite the supposed collapse. I slowly shook my head. "No, it wasn't." "And Rachel, the others, they're not dead, are they?" "Not exactly." "I don't know, Nora. I honestly don't know what they are now." We were released from the hospital the next day. The story of our ill-fated camping trip made the local news, with authorities attributing the disappearance of our colleagues to the unexpected geological event at Sleeping Giant State Park. Search and rescue operations continued for another week before being officially classified as recovery rather than rescue. I took a leave of absence from work. How could I return to that office, to those empty desks, knowing what I knew? The nightmares started almost immediately. Dreams of stone fingers reaching for me, of Rachel's eyes watching from a face of granite, of the ground beneath my feet turning to liquid and swallowing me whole. A month after the incident, I received a call from Dr. Elias Blackwood, a geology professor at Yale who had been studying the seismic event at Sleeping Giant. "Ms. Wilson," she said when I answered, "I understand you were on the mountain when the tremors began. I'd like to speak with you about what you experienced." Something in her tone, a hint of hesitancy, of disbelief in the official explanation, made me agree to meet her. We met at a small cafe in New Haven, far from the shadow of the mountain. Dr. Blackwood was in her 60s, with silver hair cut in a practical bob and eyes that missed nothing. She spread out several maps and charts on the table between us. The official explanation is that this was a minor seismic event, triggered by the collapse of unstable sections of the old quarry, she began without preamble, "but I've studied every inch of the data, and it doesn't add up." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already suspected. She lowered her voice. "The tremors didn't originate from the quarry and spread outward, as they would in a collapse scenario. They came from deep within the mountain, far deeper than any quarrying ever reached, and moved upward." She tapped a seismographic readout, almost as if something was trying to get out. A chill ran through me. "Why are you telling me this?" Dr. Blackwood studied me intently. "Because you were there, and because 3 weeks ago, a hiker reported seeing someone matching your friend Rachel's description near the quarry, despite the area being closed to the public." My heart pounded. "Did they find her?" "No. By the time rangers arrived, there was no one there, just some unusual markings carved into the rocks." She slid a photograph across the table. It showed the same crude stick figure I had seen at the quarry before everything went wrong, but now there were 5 similar figures beside it, each slightly different in proportion. Below them was a 6th figure, separate from the others with a question mark carved next to it. Me. They were waiting for me. "Ms. Wilson," Dr. Blackwood said gently, "what really happened on that mountain?" I looked at her, this rational scientist with her data and her charts, and wondered how much I could say without sounding completely insane. But there was something in her eyes, a willingness to believe, or at least to listen, that broke through my hesitation. So I told her everything: the old man's warning, Rachel's legend, the stone creatures that had once been my friends, and the ancient entity stirring beneath the mountain. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her fingers tracing the symbols in the photograph. "You know," she said finally, "every culture has stories about mountains that are more than just rock and earth. The Greeks had Mount Olympus. The Japanese have Mount Fuji. Even here in Connecticut, the indigenous peoples had their legends about Sleeping Giant. You believe me?" She smiled thinly. "I believe something extraordinary happened that defies conventional explanation. And I believe that your friends may not be beyond help." Hope and fear tangled in my chest. "What do you mean?" "Legends often contain a kernel of truth, Miss Wilson. If this entity, this giant, can transform humans into stone, perhaps the process can be reversed." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I've been researching similar folklore from around the world. Many stories suggest that such transformations can be undone if the transforming entity is defeated or appeased." She hesitated. The Quinnipiac legends specifically mention a ritual that once kept the giant sleeping soundly, a ceremony performed at the winter solstice. "And you think we could use this ritual to, what, turn my friends back to normal? Put the giant back to sleep?" She shrugged. "It's just a theory. But what other options do we have? I stared at the photograph, at the 5 figures representing my transformed colleagues and the question mark beside my own. "They're waiting for me," I said softly. "The 6th figure. That's me." "Yes, I believe it is." Dr. Blackwood's expression was grave. "The question is, are you willing to return to the mountain to save your friends?" The logical answer was no. I should walk away, try to rebuild my life, leave the nightmare behind. But I couldn't stop seeing Rachel's eyes looking out from that stone face, hearing her voice fighting through the ancient entity that had possessed her. "They're still alive, sort of, like me." "When is the winter solstice?" I asked. "December 21st, just over a month away." Dr. Blackwood reached into her bag and pulled out an old, leather-bound book. "This contains the most complete account of the Quinnipiac rituals I've been able to find. We'll need to gather certain items, learn specific chants, and we'll need help, people we can trust." I thought of Nora, still struggling with her own trauma from that night. Could I ask her to return to the mountain? And who else could we trust with something so incredible? "I know someone who might help," I said, thinking of the old hiker who had warned us. He had known something was wrong with the mountain. Perhaps he knew more. Over the next month, Dr. Blackwood and I prepared for the ritual. We tracked down the old hiker, a man named Joseph Blackhawk, whose ancestors had been among the original Quinnipiac people. At first, he refused to help us. "The giant should be left to sleep," he warned. "Your friends are already gone." But when I described how Rachel had fought against the possession, how she had helped me escape, his resistance softened. "Perhaps there is still hope for them," he conceded, "if their spirits are strong enough to resist the giant's dreams." Nora, when I finally worked up the courage to tell her our plan, reacted with understandable horror. "You want to go back there? After what happened?" Her voice shook. "Margaret, that thing nearly killed us." "And it has our friends," I reminded her. "I can't abandon them." She was quiet for a long moment. "I still have nightmares," she admitted. "I hear that sound, stone scraping against stone every time I close my eyes." "So do I. But I also see Rachel fighting to help me escape. She's still in there, Nora. They all might be." In the end, she agreed to help, though the fear never left her eyes. As the solstice approached, the mountain grew increasingly active. Minor tremors shook the area almost daily. Hikers reported strange sounds, whispers carried on the wind, the crying of children where no children should be, the sound of massive footsteps on quiet trails. Park authorities closed Sleeping Giant State Park indefinitely, citing ongoing geological instability. The night of December 21st was clear and bitterly cold, the moon full above the silent forest. Dr. Blackwood, Joseph, Nora, and I hiked up an unmarked trail on the eastern face of the mountain, away from the closed park entrances and ranger patrols. We carried backpacks filled with the items needed for the ritual: sage, tobacco, certain stones from the river that ran below the mountain, and instruments carved from bones that Joseph had somehow acquired. "The eastern approach is safest," Joseph explained as we climbed. "The giant faces west. Its influence is weaker where it cannot see." The forest was eerily silent. No animals, no rustling leaves, not even the sound of our own footsteps seemed to carry beyond a few feet. It was as if the mountain was holding its breath, waiting. We reached the summit shortly before midnight. In the moonlight, the observation tower stood like a sentinel, its stone walls gleaming silver. Beyond it, the western slope fell away toward the abandoned quarry, now cordoned off with warning signs and yellow tape. "There," Joseph said, pointing to a flat stone near the tower's base. "That is where the ceremony must be performed." Dr. Blackwood began unpacking the ritual items while Nora and I gathered wood for a small fire. Joseph knelt by the stone, running his weathered hands over symbols carved into its surface, symbols similar to those I had seen at the quarry. "These are very old," he murmured. "From before the Europeans came. My people would gather here each winter solstice to ensure the giant remained sleeping." "What happened?" I asked. "Why did they stop?" His expression darkened. "They were forced away, the rituals forgotten. Now the giant stirs in his sleep, his dreams walking the mountain." As midnight approached, Joseph directed us to our positions around the stone. The fire burned between us, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. He began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, his voice low and rhythmic. Dr. Blackwood joined in, following the phonetic transcriptions she had studied. Nora and I remained silent, as instructed, focusing our thoughts on our missing colleagues. I pictured them as they had been: Tyler's easy smile, Diane's thoughtful expressions, Marcus's quick laugh, Kevin's furrowed brow, Rachel's gentle eyes. I refused to see them as the stone creatures they had become. As Joseph's chanting intensified, the air around us seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. The fire flickered and danced, casting long shadows that moved independently of the flames. Then I heard it, the now familiar rumbling from deep within the mountain. The stone beneath us trembled slightly. "It's not working," Nora whispered, fear edging her voice. "Patience," Dr. Blackwood murmured. "The giant is resisting." Joseph's chanting grew louder, more insistent. He threw herbs into the fire, creating pungent smoke that swirled around us in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Suddenly, the rumbling stopped. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against our ears like a physical force. "Something's coming," I whispered, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. From the darkness beyond our small circle, figures emerged. 5 silhouettes moving with that unsettling combination of jerky stillness that I remembered all too well. As they stepped into the firelight, I saw that they were indeed my colleagues, or what remained of them. Their transformation had progressed further, their bodies now almost entirely stone, with only their eyes remaining human, watching us with a desperate awareness. "You came back," Rachel's voice emerged from her stone lips, the words distorted but recognizable. "We knew you would." "We've come to help you," I said, rising slowly to my feet. "To bring you back." The 5 stone figures formed a circle around us, their movements synchronized, mechanical. Joseph never stopped chanting, though his eyes widened at the sight of them. "The giant knows what you're trying to do," Tyler's figure said, his voice as flat and lifeless as Rachel's had been that night. "He will not return to sleep. He will not release us." "You're not his to keep," I insisted. "You're people, human beings, not dreams, not stone." All 5 tilted their heads at the same angle, an inhuman, while unsettling movement. "We are the mountain now," they said in unison, "and the mountain is us." The ground beneath our feet shuddered violently. Cracks appeared in the flat stone, spreading outward like a spider web. Joseph's chanting faltered for a moment before continuing with renewed urgency. "Fight it," I pleaded, looking at each stone face in turn. "Like Rachel did in the forest. Remember who you are." "We remember," Kevin's figure said, a note of sadness in his otherwise empty voice. "But remembering is not enough." The rumbling intensified. From somewhere below us came a sound like the grinding of massive stones, or the creaking of enormous joints long frozen in sleep, now struggling to move. "The giant is waking," Joseph gasped between chants. Truly waking, not just his dreams now. Fear clutched at my throat, but I forced it down. Fear was what the giant wanted, what it fed on. "What do we do?" I asked, looking between Joseph and Dr. Blackwood. It was Rachel who answered, her stone form taking a step toward me. "The quarry," she said, her voice stronger than the others, more human. "He's weak there. Where they cut into him, where they took pieces of him." Dr. Blackwood's eyes widened in understanding. "Of course," she breathed. "The ritual isn't working because the giant isn't whole. The quarrying disrupted its form, its power." So we need to go to the quarry? I asked, struggling to understand. Rachel nodded, the movement stiff and unnatural. The pieces that were taken, he's been trying to replace them. With us. Her stone hand gestured to herself and the others. But it's not enough. The wound is too deep. What are you saying? Nora asked, her voice trembling. That we need to… What? Fill in the quarry? No, Rachel said. You need to make him whole in another way. She turned to Joseph. Your people didn't just keep him sleeping. You made a pact with him. Joseph stopped chanting, his expression grave. The old stories speak of an offering, a sacrifice freely given, once each generation, blood and bone to heal the earth. A chill ran through me. Human sacrifice? He shook his head quickly. Not death, devotion, a life dedicated to the care of the mountain, a guardian who would speak for the giant, keep its dreams gentle. A shaman, Dr. Blackwood said, understanding, dawning. But when your people were displaced, there was no one to maintain the pact, Joseph finished, and so the giant's dreams turned dark, hungry. The 5 stone figures had gone completely still, watching us with those 2 human eyes. So someone needs to become this guardian, I said slowly, to renew the pact. Joseph nodded gravely. It would need to be someone the giant has already touched, someone it has already marked. All eyes turned to me. No, Nora said immediately. Margaret, you can't. But I was looking at my transformed colleagues, at Rachel, who had fought against the giant's control to save me. At Tyler and Diane, Marcus and Kevin, their humanity trapped within stone bodies. Would it free them? I asked Joseph. If I became this guardian, would the giant release them? He hesitated. The stories say the guardian takes the burden of the giant's dreams upon themselves, channels them safely. It might be enough to break its hold on your friends. But you'd be bound to this place, Dr. Blackwood warned, possibly for life. The mountain shuddered again, more violently this time. One of the observation tower's walls cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The 5 stone figures swayed but remained standing. Their expressions, what could be read of them, increasingly anxious. He's coming, Tyler's figure warned. He's almost awake. I thought of my life before this. The endless spreadsheets, the fluorescent lights, the meaningless advancement up the corporate ladder. I had brought my team here to reconnect with something real, something beyond our artificial office existence. And in a terrible way, we had. I'll do it, I said quietly. Tell me how. Joseph acted quickly, modifying the ritual with items from his pack. The new ceremony was simpler but somehow more profound. A series of vows spoken in English and Quinnipiac. My blood mixed with earth from the mountain, a thread tied around my wrist that Joseph said symbolized my bond to the giant. As he worked, the stone figures of my colleagues watched silently, while the mountain continued to rumble and shake beneath us. The quarry, Joseph said when the preparations were complete, that's where it must be finished, where the wound is deepest. We made our way down the western slope, following the transformed figures of my former team. They moved with surprising grace now, as if the closer we came to completing the ritual, the more control they had over their stone bodies. The quarry was just as I remembered it. A gaping wound in the mountainside, blocks of trap rock scattered like discarded toys. But now I could see it through different eyes, not as an abandoned industrial site, but as an injury inflicted on a living entity. In the center of the quarry floor, a perfect circle of smooth ground stood out from the rough surroundings. The stone figures positioned themselves around it, forming a pentagram with the circle at its center. This is where the oldest stone was taken, Rachel's figure explained, her voice now almost entirely her own. The heart of the giant. Joseph directed me to stand in the circle's center. The ground was warm beneath my feet, despite the December cold, warm and faintly vibrating, like resting on the chest of a massive, breathing creature. As Joseph began the final chant, the mountain's rumbling intensified, focused now directly beneath us. The stone figures of my colleagues began to glow faintly from within, as if illuminated by some internal fire. "What's happening to them?" Nora gasped. "The giant is gathering its power," Dr. Blackwood said, her scientific detachment momentarily overwhelmed by awe. "Drawing its dreams back into itself." I stood firmly in the circle, fighting the urge to run as the ground heaved beneath me. Joseph's voice rose above the rumbling, speaking words that seemed to reverberate through the very stones around us. Then he turned to me. "Speak your vow," he instructed. "Offer yourself as guardian, as the keeper of the giant's dreams." I took a deep breath, looking at each of my transformed colleagues in turn, seeing the hope in their two human eyes. Then I spoke the words Joseph had taught me, an ancient promise to watch over the mountain, to keep its dreams gentle, to be the bridge between its slumbering consciousness and the waking world. As the final words left my lips, several things happened at once. The rumbling peaked in a violent upheaval that threw Nora and Dr. Blackwood to the ground. The stone figures of my colleagues shuddered, cracks appearing across their mineral surfaces, and I felt something, a presence, vast and ancient, turn its attention fully upon me. It was like standing in the path of an avalanche, frozen as the wall of snow rushes toward you. The giant's consciousness crashed into mine, not with malice but with the blind force of something enormous suddenly focused on something tiny. Images flooded my mind. Centuries of watching the sky change, of feeling the slow creep of ice across my skin, of dreams that walked on my sleeping body. I would have been lost, my identity washed away in that ancient flood, if not for Rachel. Her stone form lurched forward, breaking the pentagram, and grasped my hand. Through that contact I felt her humanity, her warmth, her fear, her determination, anchoring me against the giant's overwhelming presence. "Remember who you are," her voice came, not through the air but directly into my mind. "Margaret Wilson, our friend, our leader." One by one, the others joined her, their stone hands linking with mine, forming a smaller circle within the larger one. Through each contact I felt their human essences, Tyler's kindness, Diane's curiosity, Marcus's humor, Kevin's determination, forming a shield around my identity. And somehow, I found the strength to stand firm against the giant's consciousness, to accept its awareness without being consumed by it, to become its guardian without becoming it. The ground stilled. The rumbling faded to a gentle vibration, like the purring of an enormous cat. And the stone forms of my colleagues began to crumble, falling away in sheets and chunks to reveal human skin beneath. They collapsed as the last of the stone fell away, human once more, unconscious but breathing, their faces peaceful in the moonlight. Only Rachel remained partially awake, her eyes meeting mine as the last fragments of stone flaked from her face. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us." Then she too succumbed to unconsciousness, the ordeal of transformation and restoration too much for a human body to endure without rest. Joseph approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. "The pact is made," he said quietly. "The giant sleeps peacefully again." "And Margaret?" Nora asked, coming to stand beside me. "What happens to her now?" I could feel it already, the change in my perception. The mountain beneath my feet was no longer just rock and earth, but a living presence, dreaming its ancient dreams. And I was part of those dreams now, their keeper and guardian. "I stay," I said simply. "At least some of the time. The giant needs its guardian." "But your life, your job," Nora began. I smiled, feeling a strange peace despite everything. I think I was due for a career change anyway. In the months that followed, my colleagues recovered fully from their ordeal. Their memories of their time as stone creatures were fragmented, dreamlike, but the experience had changed them all. Tyler and Diane left the company to start an environmental nonprofit. Marcus went back to school to study geology. Kevin, surprisingly, took over my position at Hartford Financial, bringing a new perspective to corporate life. Rachel stayed in Connecticut, working remotely as a freelance analyst while helping me adjust to my new role as the Giant's guardian. We found a small cabin on the eastern slope of the mountain, close enough for me to maintain my connection to the sleeping entity beneath while still living a relatively normal life. Joseph taught me what he knew of his ancestors' ways, helping me interpret the dreams that sometimes flowed from the mountain into my sleeping mind. Dr. Blackwood documented everything, creating a modern record of the ancient pact for future generations. The mountain sleeps peacefully now. Sometimes, when I walk its trails in the quiet hours before dawn, I feel its dreams stirring. Dreams of ancient forests, of ice ages come and gone, of stars wheeling overhead across countless millennia. But they are gentle dreams now, watched over and guided. And if hikers sometimes report seeing a woman sitting motionless on certain rocks, communing with the mountain in ways they don't understand, the park rangers just smile and say it's part of Sleeping Giant's charm. Another legend to add to the many that cloak its slopes. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 34 years old. And now I am also something more. The guardian of a dreaming mountain, the keeper of a promise as old as the stone beneath my feet. Sometimes I think I should be afraid of what I've become. But then I remember my friends, restored to their humanity by that same ancient power, and I feel only gratitude. The giant sleeps, and I watch over its dreams.